Chapter 324. The night turned into the deepest black, obscuring the moonlight and covering all the light. Everything on Lonely Mountain seemed to disappear completely.
In all directions on the ground, in the sky and on the ground as far as the eye could see, there were swords.
The swords were densely packed together. The sword shadows were short and delicate, but they were indescribably sharp.
Countless sword shadows hovered over the entire Lonely Mountain, row after row, piece after piece, up and down everywhere as far as the eye could see.
Li Tianlan felt as if he had seen a sea. The ubiquitous sword intent around him was like the sea breeze on the sea. The sound of the wind was sharp but seemingly soft. It was a little cold and gloomy. Li Tianlan's breath was full of sword intent. The sword intent rushed into his internal organs through his breath and pierced his blood vessels. In an instant, Li Tianlan's body was already injured internally and externally. But the sword sea in front of him still hovered motionlessly in every corner of reality. It was like a calm sea.
But no matter how calm it was still a sea, and it had the power to set off a raging tide and subvert everything at any time.
Li Tianlan stared at the endless sword sea in front of him. He could feel that it was a sword strike. But this sword strike was completely beyond his understanding. He used to stand at the peak of martial arts. Even if his strength was gone now, his vision had never regressed. He could see that the world was quiet. He could see that the world was a void. He could see some of the trajectory of this sword strike. But he couldn't understand how powerful it was to have such an abundant and majestic sword intent. In the face of this sword strike, not to mention now, even if he entered the invincible realm in Heaven Capital, he might not have the slightest strength to resist. At this moment, Li Tianlan felt like an ant. An ant under the Sword Emperor's sword.
The other members of the Li family on the top of the mountain were still motionless and seemed to be meditating.
However, amidst the silence, some pained and hurried breathing sounds became extremely clear.
The meditation had ended at the moment when the sword intent appeared.
However, all the members of the Li family were completely blocked by this sword strike. The sword shadow and the sword energy coexisted, as if they were all over the world. Everyone was suppressed in place and could not move. Only Li Honghe remained calm.
Wisps of sword intent spread around him, firmly protecting the space of about 10 meters around him. Wherever the sword intent passed, the sword shadows floating in front of him shattered.
The sword shadow shattered into sword chi. The sword chi circled around Lonely Mountain and formed a new sword shadow. The cycle continued without end, and it seemed like the cycle of reincarnation.
Li Honghe was motionless, letting the sword shadows in front of him break and reassemble.
He kept releasing his sword intent, breaking the sword shadows within 10 meters around him. At this moment, the place where Li Honghe landed was the only pure land in Lonely Mountain. The pure land was only 10 meters wide. But the entire Lonely Mountain was more than 1,000 feet long.
Li Honghe silently looked at the sea of swords in front of him that covered his whole vision, and even occupied his whole consciousness. He saw a large number of sword shadows shattering, and then saw a large number of sword shadows reforming.
What an impressive move, shatter reincarnation. Li Honghe sighed softly. Did you derive this sword move by yourself? Wang Tianzong was silent. There was only a sea of swords on Lonely Mountain, but no sword emperor. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly shook. Broken reincarnation.
It was the last move of the 24 moves of sword, the absolute sword. Or rather, it was the last half of the style.
3 years ago, Li Tianlan once got the half-style sword manual from Lin Fengting.
But before that, even in the 24 moves of sword of the Li family, there was no such half-style.
But recently, Wang Tianzong used a complete move, broken reincarnation.
If this sword move was derived by himself, how familiar would he be with the first 23 moves of the 24 moves of sword?
Tianzong, don't you come out and talk with me? Li Honghe laughed. Anyway, I'm very happy that you can come to Lonely Mountain today. The sea of swords seemed to fluctuate with Wang Tianzong's emotions. So the whole world was shaking in front of Li Tianlan's eyes. The huge vortex spinning endless sword intent in the sky paused for a moment. Silently, Wang Tianzong's figure appeared in front of Li Honghe and Li Tianlan. The three of them were less than 10 meters apart. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Honghe calmly. Li Honghe was also looking at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were complicated, self-deprecating, and a little guilty. Li Tianlan looked at this scene and felt like he was witnessing history. The grievances that had existed for many years clearly appeared in front of him.
In the sea of swords in front of him. Wang Tianzong hesitated, but still bowed deeply to Li Honghe and whispered, "Uncle Li." Li Honghe laughed. The past grudges and grievances seemed to become clear with the words Uncle Li.
"You hate me," Li Honghe said.
"Hate doesn't make sense."
Wang Tianzong shook his head.
He looked at Li Honghe's increasingly old face, and his eyes were no longer calm. In a sense, in the past many years, Li Honghe was one of his closest elders. Even now, Wang Tianzong still clearly remembered the days when he learned swordsmanship with Li Honghe. The four of them learned the 24 moves of sword of the Li family, the 24 moves of sword of the Lin clan, and the 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. It was an unguarded time. The children studied hard, and the elders spared no effort in teaching. Wang Tianzong's emotions were chaotic and absent-minded. In the face of Li Tianlan, he could be calm because he was the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and the sword emperor of Jianghu state. But in the face of Li Honghe, he thought he could be calm and indifferent as well. But until he stood in front of him, Wang Tianzong knew that he was still the child of that year. At this moment, he was neither the sword emperor nor the patriarch. He was just Wang Tianzong. "You deserve to hate me,"
Li Honghe whispered. "I owe the Wang family of Beihai too much. You deserve to kill me today." "I don't hate you."
Wang Tianzong looked into Li Honghe's eyes. "I know very well that when the Heroes Club, Fantasy World, and the Polar Ground Alliance joined forces to invade Jianghu state, my father's serious injury and death a few years later had nothing to do with you."
Li Honghe was silent.
He had a clear conscience in that battle. The old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai was seriously injured.
He was also seriously injured. Wang Tianzong would not hate him because of this.
Most of the grievances between the Li family and the Wang family came from that battle.
"It's my fault. Everything happened because of me. I thought you would come looking for me a few years ago."
Li Honghe laughed at himself. The Li family and the Wang family have walked side by side for hundreds of years.
"That's not fake."
Wang Tianzong's voice was very soft and his emotions were very sincere. "If the Li family doesn't enter the secular world from now on, I don't want to care about what happened that year.
But now it's different."
Li Honghe nodded and asked straightforwardly, "Will I die today?"
"Yes."
Wang Tianzong's tone was very respectful and firm.
"How about Tianlan and the Li family?"
Li Honghe asked again.
"I'll only kill you today."
Wang Tianzong's tone was indifferent.
That was very clear. He only killed Li Honghe.
As for whether others would kill Li Tianlan or not, he would not care.
Li Honghe did not speak, just looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm and soft. "You can't go back if you're wrong.
Senior Li, the biggest mistake in your life is that you educated a good grandson, but you didn't educate your son well. If you were the fanatic of that year, what would you do?"
Li Honghe suddenly asked.
"I don't know." Wang Tianzong's mood did not fluctuate at all.
"I didn't think about it either."
Li Honghe chuckled.
"Ambition. Sure enough, it can achieve everything and destroy everything."
Wang Tianzong was silent. But the sea of swords in heaven and earth began to shake gently. The sword energy raged and swept across the sky. "Whether you believe it or not, I want to say that I didn't know at the beginning," Li Honghe whispered. "Fanatic has been ambitious since he was a child, and he inherited the stubbornness of the Li family. You entered the invincible realm a few years later than him, and at that time, your father's health was extremely poor, so he thought he saw an opportunity. He wanted to change and wanted to have a say in Jianghu state. He thought that the strength of the Li family was irresistible, and the Li family did not need any allies to advance and retreat together. So," Wang Tianzong suddenly interrupted Li Honghe's words. "So he wanted to annex the Wang family of Beihai, even destroy the whole Wang family of Beihai, replace the Wang family of Beihai, monopolize the whole southeast group, and then conquer the whole Jianghu state?"
Li Honghe's body stiffened.
Li Tianlan, who had been watching silently, also trembled and looked at Li Honghe and Wang Tianzong in disbelief. He did do a lot of things in those days. Within the southeast group, the power contrast between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai began to tilt. The power of the Li family even vaguely suppressed that of the Wang family of Beihai. During that time, you were all concerned about your father's health and neglected the control of the outside world. I was in charge of the southeast group, but most of the time I was staring at the prince group. By the time I realized what Fanatic had done, it was too late. He had completed his own layout and was only waiting for your father's death. Then he could control everything.
Wang Tianzong listened quietly.
He nodded and said, "So you made the best of the mistake." "Yes, how could the friendship with the Wang family of Beihai be more important than your son and the Li family?"
"I wanted to stop it."
Li Honghe smiled a little miserably.
"But you should know Fanatic's character. He was ambitious, resourceful, and his character was extreme. By the time he thought he could let me know, the general trend had basically been formed. It was not easy for me to stop it. I had been mediocre all my life and was not strong enough. At that time, your father was in danger, and Fanatic entered the invincible realm earlier than you. Countless people in the Southeast group put their hopes on him. During that time, his voice in the Southeast group was enough to go against my will. I didn't want to break with the Wang family of Beihai, but the situation had reached that point. It seemed that everyone was forcing me to break with the Wang family of Beihai and completely annex you."
The yellow robe.
Wang Tianzong's tone was full of sarcasm. "It hasn't come to that point yet."
Li Honghe shook his head.
"At least in my opinion, there was still a chance to calm the situation back then. I talked with Fanatic several times and did something secretly. He was my son, and I knew his character very well. According to his character, if he succeeded in annexing the Wang family of Beihai, the future of the Li family would either be extremely brilliant or be doomed eternally. His path was too extreme, but I didn't want that kind of risky future. I wanted to try my best to reverse all this. I even wanted to go to Mount Dibbing to communicate with your father."
Li Honghe smiled bitterly.
"But you moved too fast. Before I was ready, you had already united with Gu Xingyun and created the treason case on the border of Annan State. When I got the news, it was too late."
"Did I do something wrong?"
Wang Tianzong asked. He had asked this question to many people. Just a few hours ago, he had asked Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun said that he had no choice. But Li Honghe only kept silent. The treason case directly subverted the Li family. As the patriarch of the Li family, Li Honghe could not say that Wang Tianzong did the right thing. He could only choose to be silent. "I don't know if I can believe you. But even if I can, Uncle Li, tell me, do I dare to believe it?"
The inheritance of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years, the assets of trillions or even more, the stability of tens of millions of people, the future of hundreds of thousands of troops, and even the peace and stability of the entire Jianghu state.
Wang Tianzong patted his chest. "My father was in danger at that time, and all this was on me.
If you were me, would you dare to bet on my trust in you with these things?"
The topic that had been suppressed in his heart for many years made him a little excited. He took a step forward and walked directly into the range of Li Honghe's sword energy.
"Answer me, if you were me, would you dare to bet?"
"I wouldn't dare." Li Honghe finally spoke. His voice was dry and hoarse. "I wouldn't dare either." Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and calmed down. "And even if I dared, you might not be able to reverse everything at that time. The hundreds of years of affection between our two families may be as heavy as mountains and seas, but I have a clear conscience. If I hadn't taken action that year, everything that the Li family has today would be what the Wang family of Beihai has today. Maybe the Wang family of Beihai would be inferior to the Li family today. Far inferior." Wang Tianzong said coldly, "It was you who threatened the survival of the Wang family of Beihai. What choice did I have? If there was another choice, I wouldn't have let her besiege Li Guangtu that year. When she just entered the invincible realm, she went to cooperate with Kunlun City to besiege Li Guangtu. Both you and I should know what that means. That's the main reason why you hate me, right?" Li Honghe said softly. "She was beaten down to the invincible realm, and her injury has not healed yet. That was your most serious loss. If it hadn't happened, why would you be so tired all these years?" "You can think so."
Wang Tianzong looked indifferent.
"The Li family wanted to annex the Wang family of Beihai, and I couldn't agree. Everything I did was with a clear conscience. But the Wang family was not destroyed, and she was beaten down to the invincible realm. In my eyes, that's all the grievances." He bowed to Li Honghe again and said softly, "Senior Li, it was the Li family that taught me everything in the world. There is no right or wrong, only success or failure. I don't hate you.
As long as you can walk through the sea of swords and appear in front of me, The grievances between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai can be written off. His figure slowly disappeared in front of the Sea of Swords and became fainter and fainter. But his voice swept through the sky and echoed between heaven and earth. This is the 24 moves of sword that you taught me, and it's also my understanding of it. All my understanding has been turned into this move, break of reincarnation. Wang Tianzong said calmly, it's perfect to use the unique skill of the Li family to end the grievances with the Li family. Li Honghe looked at the Sea of Swords in front of him. The Sea of Swords was shaking, as if the sea was fluctuating. Huge waves were coming. A frenzy was coming. It was a pitch-black sea. Li Honghe's body lit up. Endless sword energy whistled in front of him and turned into the purest light. He turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at Li Honghe. The Wang family of Beihai is right, Li Honghe said softly. Li Tianlan, who had completely calmed down, nodded and said slowly, the Li family is right. It was only ambition that was wrong. And there was no absolute right or wrong in the world. There was only success or failure. Even if it was a grievance, it should be pure. I'll go to the other side of the sea and have a look. Li Honghe pointed to the Sea of Swords in front of him and said softly, if you have a chance, leave quickly and don't worry about anything else. He took a step forward. The extreme and pure light suddenly spread wildly with Li Honghe's straightened body. Above Lonely Mountain, the tide suddenly sounded. The boundless Sea of Swords was completely violent in an instant. The whole sea was completely lifted up, rushed up into the sky, and fell rapidly. Violent swords. Chaotic swords. The sword light shuttled through every corner of Lonely Mountain, like a black tide, surging and raging. The light was still moving forward, slowly piercing the darkness. In the light, a little blood shot out. There was more and more blood. In the frozen space, the blood dyed the night red. The sword light shrouded Lonely Mountain. The moonlight shrouded West Lake. The broken bridge, the ancient tower, the lush flowers and plants, the clear water. The moonlight shone down. West Lake in the night was quiet and almost beautiful, like a picture scroll that should not exist in the world. Gu Xingyun stood quietly on the broken bridge. He was enjoying the scenery. But his whole mind was feeling the sword intent on Lonely Mountain. Lonely Mountain had become the only darkness in the night. The moonlight was completely shattered by the sword intent, and the whole Lonely Mountain was dark. The pure darkness was like a void. The lake water was turbulent in the sword intent. From far to near, the ripples in the water were spreading. The ripples grew bigger and bigger and turned into waves. The waves became billows. The billows became waves. The violent force was shaking in West Lake with Lonely Mountain as the center. The lake water was lifted up in the absolute force and spread over the lake. The sound of the water almost suppressed everything. Gu Xingyun stood on the bridge and looked across the lake to Lonely Mountain. It was getting darker and darker on Lonely Mountain. Gu Xingyun gently raised the corner of his mouth and said to himself, "It's really lively." No one responded to his words. The sword intent on Lonely Mountain became more and more fierce and violent. Suddenly, a dazzling light appeared in the absolute darkness. The light flashed away, and then it was completely suppressed by the darkness again. Gu Xingyun laughed out loud. He knew that Li Honghe had taken action. But what covered Lonely Mountain was the peak sword intent in the whole dark world for decades, which was almost irresistible. Even at his peak, Li Honghe might not be able to take this sword stroke. Now his strength might have broken through the peak, but his body was much worse. How could he block this sword stroke? The Li family is destined to be destroyed tonight. Gu Xingyun muttered to himself again. For you, this is really something to be happy about. A cold but soft voice suddenly sounded in Gu Xingyun's ear. But will what you hope really happen? Gu Xingyun suddenly turned around and looked at the sky behind him. A white figure appeared silently less than 20 meters behind him. The woman wore a long white dress, but she wore a golden mask that covered most of her beautiful face. She stood in the air. Her slender figure seemed to block the bright moon. So Gu Xingyun's eyes dimmed, and there was only a white shadow left in his eyes. Situ Zongyue? Gu Xingyun raised his eyebrows and sneered. You dare to intervene in this matter? Why not? Situ Zongyue said quietly. Do you think it's useful for you to come? Gu Xingyun sneered. His elegant face looked a little ferocious and distorted in the darkness.
Tonight, the Li family will be destroyed, and no one can stop it. After the Li family, it will be your Sai city. No one can escape.
The Li family will not be destroyed,
Situ Tsongyue said softly. Even if Wang Tianzong can't kill him, I will. Gu Xingyun stopped smiling and said in a cold tone, Do you think you can stop Wang Tianzong? Or can you stop me? It's enough that I can deal with you. Situ Tsongyue's voice was neither fast nor slow. Gu Xingyun had completely calmed down and said lightly, Why? Stop.
Fuck you, madman.
Gu Xingyun, who had just calmed down for less than a second, suddenly roared and rushed to the sky without hesitation. The moonlight was still bright, but the pale white moonlight completely dimmed in an instant. Heaven and earth were disappearing and going away. Situ Tsongyue's figure instantly became very clear in Gu Xingyun's sight. The white dress fluttered in the void. Gu Xingyun could see all the lines on the golden mask clearly. Situ Tsongyue's rosy and beautiful lips were tightly pursed, and her cold eyes had become determined and crazy in an instant. The moonlight was fading. Finally, it disappeared completely. Sound, waves, sword intent, light. All disappeared. In the dark void, only Gu Xingyun and Situ Tsongyue were left. Useless heaven and earth. This was the most powerful unique skill of Sai City. When Gu Xingyun's body slightly lost balance in Situ Tsongyue's domain, the 10th unique domain of Kunlun City had been fully opened. Situ Tsongyue raised her hand.
His arm lit up with a devilish purple light that was powerful enough to shatter the void.
The purple light turned into a small but ferocious hand cannon. Gu Xingyun's face was twisted and completely deformed. The distance between them was less than 50 meters. The famous murderous weapon setting sun was dozens of meters away from Gu Xingyun. No hesitation, no hesitation. Situ Tsongyue didn't even think about it. She didn't waste time at all. The moment the purple hand cannon was formed, the muzzle was aimed at Gu Xingyun. She pulled the trigger. Boom! The silent void was broken. Heaven and earth were useless. The 10th unique domain. They were all broken. The entire extremely quiet world was completely occupied by the absolute roar in an instant. The violent sound occupied all hearing. The sky above the west lake suddenly lit up with a purple light that pierced through heaven and earth. The purple light kept rising and dancing, breaking the broken bridge and evaporating the lake water. Gu Xingyun's body was directly blasted into the bottom of the lake by the murderous weapon. The whole West Lake was shaking violently. All the lake water within a radius of thousands of meters suddenly exploded under the shot. The monstrous waves directly surged to the sky thousands of meters high. The strong purple light blocked the moonlight and covered everything. The demonic purple chi was vast and mighty. Under the moonlight. On West Lake. Chapter 325. Gu Xingyun never expected that Situ Tsongyue would be so tough. For more than 20 years, Sai City had been hidden in the northeast. Situ Tsongyue, known as the hidden god of Jianghu State, was also one of the invincible realm experts in Jianghu State, but she rarely went down Mount Taibai. Since the establishment of Sai City 3 years ago, it seemed that Situ Tsongyue went down the mountain for the first time. Now it was the second time. In the long years, the once stunning woman seemed to be silent with the ice and snow on Mount Taibai. She seemed to have forgotten the whole world and kept silent, as if nothing had anything to do with her. Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong joined hands. They had thought that Situ Tsongyue would come, but neither of them expected that she would express her position so fiercely and resolutely. Among the 12 murderous weapons, setting sun's power was average, but its energy storage time was the fastest. It was the most suitable weapon for some forces with insufficient foundation. After all, no matter how weak the power of a murderous weapon was, it could directly threaten the life and death of an invincible realm expert. Situ Tsongyue and Gu Xingyun were only dozens of meters away. The distance was too close. The moment the setting sun finished storing energy and lit up, it had shattered the domains of the 2 invincible realm experts and directly exploded in front of Gu Xingyun's chest. 400 years since the appearance of the murderous weapon in the dark world, this was the first time that a murderous weapon had fired at a person in its own country or force. Situ Tsongyue's action was so abrupt and determined that Gu Xingyun had no time to react. The surging purple light covered the whole lake, and the majestic power turned into a purple light beam visible to the naked eye. The deafening roar suppressed Gu Xingyun's furious roar. The destructive energy suppressed Gu Xingyun and directly blasted him to the bottom of the lake. Destroyed. Torn. Twisted. For the first time in his life, Gu Xingyun was so frightened. He could clearly feel the surging power tearing every inch of his flesh and blood, twisting his internal organs, as if it wanted to completely destroy his whole body here. He was hit by the murderous weapon at such a close distance, and the shadow of death instantly enveloped all his consciousness. He couldn't die. As the only pillar of Kunlun City now, how could he die here without any psychological preparation when Kunlun City had a bright future? Blood burst out from every corner of Gu Xingyun's body and turned into a blood mist, dyeing the lake red. Gu Xingyun's eyes also became red. The lake water was constantly surging in the chaotic energy. Through the clear water, Gu Xingyun could vaguely see Situ Tsungyue's white dress above the lake. He suddenly became extremely angry and resentful. B*TCH. This slut. Those who had been played by Li Kuangtu were all bitches. Do you feel so good after being played by Li Kuangtu? So much so that you couldn't forget it for more than 20 years? The muscles all over Gu Xingyun's body began to swell. Absolute power surged in his body, and his eyes were scarlet and tyrannical. He didn't want to die. At the very least, he didn't want to die in the hands of these lowly women. The purple light pressed against his chest. The violent destructive power bombarded Gu Xingyun at an unimaginable speed. Gu Xingyun opened his mouth and roared. He was at the bottom of the lake, but the moment he opened his mouth, all the lake water within a radius of 1,000 meters was instantly pushed out with him as the center. 9th Nether Impasse. 10th Unique Domain. The 2 domains of the 10 skills of true martial arts were constantly superimposed, and the deep lake suddenly began to boil and surge. Sword light appeared around Gu Xingyun. Layers of sword light flew wildly around him, like a blooming flower. The flower turned into a complicated sword formation. The sword formation suddenly formed a storm. The 8th Supreme Sword Dance. Countless sword lights whizzed and spun around him, layer after layer, without end. Gu Xingyun's body had been completely shrouded by the sword light, which was still rotating. Countless sword shadows passed through the void around Gu Xingyun, spread into the lake, and flew wildly in the area within a radius of 1,000 meters. The place where Gu Xingyun stood formed a tornado completely composed of sword light. The tornado spread at the bottom of the lake, and the whole lake's surface was undulating in the storm. The surging and strange purple light kept rushing into the lake. West Lake turned purple in the night. The lake's surface turned into a crazy whirlpool. The monstrous waves kept rising with purple light. Situ Tsungyue raised one hand high. The purple sun in her palm was constantly expanding. Looking from a distance, Situ Tsungyue, who was delicate and slim, seemed to be holding a sun in her hand. Gu Xingyun's cold roar had rushed out of the bottom of the lake. The purple light was still moving forward. But the sword light rotated and scattered the purple light. Then it drove the lake water to rotate and fly out again, condensing in Situ Tsungyue's hand. The power of the murderous weapon still existed. However, Gu Xingyun broke out regardless of the consequences. The defense of the 8th Supreme Sword Dance had reached the limit. The sword light formed a storm. Every time the storm rotated, it drove the power of the murderous weapon to be constantly reflected to Situ Tsungyue. Gu Xingyun used his own unique skill to force Situ Tsungyue to bear the power of the setting sun with him. Situ Tsungyue's face was pale. She raised her palm again. One hand became 2 hands. The purple sun above her hands was getting bigger and bigger. The surging waves of purple light had condensed into a huge ball in her hand, with Situ Tsungyue's own sword intent, Gu Xingyun's sword intent, and the power of the murderous weapon. The ball kept expanding. He borrowed the enemy's power for his own use. How familiar was this scene? All-embracing collection. There was only one word difference between this move and all-embracing collection, but their martial arts concepts were surprisingly consistent. However, compared with the unique skill of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which was famous in the Dark World, Situ Tsungyue's all-embracing collection obviously could not make good use of the enemy's power. She could also borrow the enemy's power for her own use, but she was constantly bearing the power reflected by the enemy in the whole process. Situ Tsungyue. In an instant, Gu Xingyun's roar had sounded at the bottom of the lake and surged to the sky. The whole lake was almost completely overturned in the rotating storm of sword intent. The domain around Gu Xingyun continued to shrink and spread.
He was covered in blood and was about to rush out of the lake. A touch of madness suddenly flashed in Situ Tsongyue's eyes. Her white dress was fluttering in the air. Her body suddenly tightened. The purple sun condensed on her hands flew out and was directly smashed to the bottom of the lake by her. The purple light was dazzling to the extreme in an instant. The moment the storm rushed out of the lake, the scorching sun fell. The whole West Lake seemed to be silent for a moment. For an eternal moment, everything seemed to freeze in an instant. Then it was the most thorough destruction. The dazzling lightning flashed in the surging lake water along with the purple light, and a mountain rose from the violent lake surface. The mountain rose abruptly, reaching a height of 1,000 meters. At the moment when the 10th unique domain in heaven and earth collided, the mountain rising from the lake seemed to be frozen in the void forever. The purple light flashed in the void, with the strongest power of the 2 invincible realm experts on the divine list, and suddenly exploded in the void. The mountain burst into pieces in an instant, with immeasurable sword intent and immeasurable light. There seemed to be the sound of a flash flood in the air. What rose from the lake in an instant was not a mountain at all, but a huge white wave that reached a height of 1,000 meters. The void disappeared, and the huge wave collapsed. The huge wave turned into a raging tide that could cover everything, surging and beating everything around it. The broken bridge, the flat ground, and the dense flowers and plants suddenly became broken and fragmented with the beating of the huge wave. In the area where the two fought, the area with a radius of 1,000 meters became a real absolute domain in an instant. The demonic purple light completely dimmed. Situ Tsongyue's white dress fluttered. Her body swayed in the air, and she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Gu Xingyun, who was covered in blood, suddenly rushed out of the lake. Without looking at Situ Tsongyue, he flew directly to the southwest. Far away from Lonely Mountain, the moonlight turned into a clear glow and shone down. It was lonely. Situ Tsongyue, whose face was pale, suddenly stood up straight in the air. Her figure flashed in the air, and there were suddenly countless residual shadows under the night sky. Her white clothes fluttered in the residual shadows. Instead of chasing Gu Xingyun, she rushed directly in the direction of Lonely Mountain. Around Lonely Mountain, the mountains and rivers had been completely connected by the sword intent. The violent sword intent formed a sea. The endless sword shadows turned into the water in the sea. Between the sword shadows, there were huge waves and surging tides. The sword shadows filled the top and bottom of Lonely Mountain, and there was no place to stand. This was a real overwhelming sword shadow that filled all the fields of vision. It shuttled back and forth endlessly. On Lonely Mountain, all the flowers and trees were torn apart, and huge cracks began to appear on the solid ground. The deep darkness became deeper and deeper. In front of Situ Tsongyue, there was nothing but swords and swords. Only those who saw the magnificent scene of this sword could really understand what the 4 words, Sword Emperor of Jianghu State, meant. Situ Tsongyue raised her head and looked at the top of the mountain. The top of the mountain was already a pure darkness without the slightest light. It enveloped everything, as if it would never change. Situ Tsongyue took a deep breath and stepped onto Lonely Mountain. Around her, thousands of sword shadows suddenly surged like a tide and rain, completely drowning her figure in an instant. Situ Tsongyue was climbing the mountain. Military Counselor was also climbing the mountain. However, when Situ Tsongyue just started to take a step, Military Counselor had reached the top of the mountain. The top of Mount Dibing was the most magnificent. The endless vast palaces stretched all the way among the flowers and plants, and there were countless pavilions and terraces. Standing on the top of Mount Dibing, no matter from which angle, it was the most beautiful scenery. For the enemies of the Wang family of Beihai, the mountain was full of scenery. The foot of the mountain was full of traps. Climbing the mountain was more difficult than going to the sky. This sentence was the most suitable to describe Mount Dibing. Under this not-so-steep mountain, more than 50,000 elite troops were stationed almost all the year round. Moreover, they were well-equipped and had excellent cooperative combat ability. These 50,000 troops were the famous internal defense force of the Wang family of Beihai. An elite force that could be called a trump card in any country. The internal defense force of the Wang family of Beihai could monitor almost every corner of every road in Mount Dibing and make the fastest response in the shortest time. If any enemy wanted to enter Mount Dibing, it was impossible to bypass the internal defense force of the royal family. If it was a strong attack, even if the 50,000 troops could hold on for a while, It was enough to hold on until nearly 300,000 troops of the Beihai military region came to support. The Wang family of Beihai was very strong. The defense of Mount Dibing was very strong. But all this was meaningless for military counselor. The internal defense force could indeed monitor every corner outside the core area of Mount Dibing. But they couldn't stop the mole from the Wang family of Beihai. So he came to Mount Dibing. He even brought a full set of combat equipment. The plan is going well. In a palace on the top of Mount Dibing for guests, military counselor turned around and looked at his companions in front of him.
If there is no problem, put on the equipment now. Our information is very reliable. The internal defense force will change shifts at 11 o'clock tonight. At that time, there will be about a 3-minute gap in their dispatch. Our friends in the Wang family of Beihai can buy us 2 minutes.
Plus the time when we take action, the people on the top of the mountain give a warning and the first batch of elites of the internal defense force arrive at the top of the mountain. We can take action in about 10 minutes.
He looked deeply at the figures standing side by side in the dark and said respectfully, "Do you have any questions?" "No problem."
Beside military counselor, in the dark, there were 10 men in black lined up.
They went up the mountain tonight and didn't intend to go down in one piece. They were men of sacrifice. No matter how high their martial arts realm was, men of sacrifice were men of sacrifice. Men of sacrifice didn't need to have problems. Their only task was to die. I can guarantee that everything you've done tonight will be worth it. For your former highness, for your current highness, and for your future highness. Saint walked out of the darkness and said solemnly, "Everything tonight is definitely worth it." Next to Saint stood the Duke and the General. Everyone stood in the darkness, their faces blurry and indistinct. The 10 men in black stood quietly and breathed steadily. "Put on the equipment." Military counselor took a deep look at the 10 men of sacrifice in front of him and waved his hand. The men in black began to move. The 4 supermasters of Samsara also moved. The equipment they needed tonight had been placed in the dark hall several days in advance, just waiting for their action tonight. Some experts of the Wang family of Beihai living on the top of Mount Dibing were also transferred to other places for some seemingly coincidental or inevitable reasons. Tonight's action was a plan made by the internal and external cooperation of the Wang family of Beihai. It had been prepared for a long time and now everything was ready. Military counselor picked up his equipment. In the darkness, it was a black armor. The armor was extremely heavy and reflected a dim light in the darkness. The effect of this armor was almost zero in the actual combat. But tonight, it was destined to play a huge role. Larman elastic alloy. It was the latest research result of the Germanic military. It was a super strong alloy that could be used in the latest generation of main battle tanks, but now it was made into armor. The only advantage of the armor was that it was strong. It was strong and not easy to destroy. The disadvantage was that it was heavy. "I hate this thing." The military advisor sighed and put on the armor that weighed more than 100 kilograms. Saint, General, Duke, and military counselor. The 4 supermasters of Samsara all put on their equipment. The 10 black-clothed men donned armor and stood in a row again. It was already 11 o'clock in the evening. "The 4 of us will wait here and give the last blow." Military counselor's body was in the armor. His voice buzzed in the hood. "Everyone, have a safe trip." Among the 10 men in black, the leader reached out his hand and patted his chest. Then he turned around and walked out of the hall. 10 men in black. Under the 10 metal helmets, there was a calm and indifferent face. They were not afraid of death. Because in the hearts of the world, they had been dead for many years. Death was freedom. So they had been free for many years. They didn't care where they died, as long as their death was worthwhile. The 10 men walked out of the hall one by one. When they walked out of the hall, the man in black at the front turned around and looked at the 4 supermasters of Samsara in the darkness. Saint and military counselor stood at the front, looking solemn and solemn. They said one sentence respectively. Only 2 words. One sentence was, "Don't worry." One sentence was worth it. The man in black smiled. Under the hood, his face was a little blurred. Since it was worthwhile to die tonight, there was nothing to worry about. Maybe there were some regrets. They didn't see the day when the young master really ruled the dark world. As for death, there was really nothing to be afraid of. They had been dead for too many years. Their graves were now in Lin An. Among the tombstones, there were their names. The men in black turned around and began to move forward. They walked out of the hall that was specially used to receive guests. Ahead was the Emperor Hall, which symbolized the status on Mount Dibing. It was different from the stage of Formidable Person, the Holy Land of Mount Dibing. It was different from the World Palace. The Emperor Hall was where Wang Tianzong lived. It was located in the center of Mount Dibing. Several core laboratories on Mount Dibing, as well as some secret places such as underground munitions factories, were all behind the Emperor Hall. The eyes of the 10 men in black gradually became sharp. In the night, they sped up. Faster and faster. Their armor, which weighed hundreds of kilograms, made a sound as they moved. 10 people. 3 people in a group. As the leader, the man in black was in his own group. The 10 people began to disperse. They began to run. They strode wildly. The ground on Mount Dibing rumbled. Whew! The guards on Mount Dibing found the abnormality at the first time and instinctively raised the muzzle in their hands. But the 10 people in different directions did not slow down. With great power, they hit the guards and directly rushed to the Emperor Hall. Kill! The man in black in a single group suddenly roared. There seemed to be a muffled thunder on Mount Dibing. The shining blue light suddenly rose to the sky. The thunder light was like a waterfall, directly covering the entire Emperor Hall. The light spread over Mount Dibing. For a moment, the eyes of the 4 supermasters of Samsara were focused in front of the Emperor Hall. Wang Tianzong was not on Mount Dibing. The Emperor Hall was the whole meaning of their action tonight. Endless thunderlight continued to explode in the air. The sky seemed to turn blue. But in the suddenly focused eyes of Military Counselor Saint, the tall front door of the Emperor Hall opened quietly. In the blink of an eye, the dark blue curtain of night completely disappeared. There was a dim yellow between heaven and earth. Time seemed to be flowing backward, from night to dusk. The dim yellow light enveloped the entire Emperor Hall. The sword light did not seem to appear, but in front of the Emperor Hall, there was sword light everywhere. Every ray of dim yellow light was a sword. An invincible sword. An extremely explosive sword. The man in black who rushed to the Emperor Hall first roared and melted in the dim yellow sword light. Then the brighter blue thunder light lit up, and the target was still the Emperor Hall. The dusk seemed to be flowing, and the sword light kept spreading. There seemed to be a sunset in the night. The sun was setting. The sword light in the night was brighter. A slim and beautiful figure flew out of the Emperor Hall and stood on the eaves above the Emperor Hall. The setting sun rose again in the night. The dim yellow light directly enveloped the entire Mount Dibing in a flash. The night completely dissipated. The woman on the Emperor Hall waved her hand forward. In the night sky, the dim yellow light suddenly expanded and spread. It was silent, but so beautiful and so dangerous. The woman's long hair kept dancing in the sword light. At this moment, everyone saw her face. That beautiful face was full of coldness and majesty at this time. Summer solstice. Chapter 326. It was not the first time that Military Counselor had seen summer solstice. He was the second supermaster in the Samsara Palace. But if he took off his cloak and came to Mount Dibing, the hostess of the Wang family of Beihai had to accompany Wang Tianzong, no matter how indifferent she was to the world. This was the minimum respect. Military Counselor had been to Mount Dibing before. Therefore, in his eyes, Xianxia was an innocent, lively and intelligent girl. She didn't have any schemes. Even though she was middle-aged, her heart was still as clear as glass and carefree. She was a woman who had been carefully protected and even spoiled by Wang Tianzong. She was so simple as if she lived in a fairy tale world. This was summer solstice in Military Counselor's eyes. But now, looking at the woman standing quietly above Emperor Palace, Military Counselor even felt that he had hallucinations. Summer solstice had no schemes. But she had a sword. She had a sword. She had majesty. That was indescribable strength and majesty. The dark night completely faded in front of Emperor Palace. The dim yellow sword light silently extended to every space in front of the palace. A large amount of sword light gathered and did not disperse, directly forming a setting sun above summer solstice. The setting sun became more and more blazing, so the sword intent became purer. This was another expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the Wang family of Beihai. The hostess, who had always played the role of a silly and sweet person in the Wang family of Beihai, might not be interested in strategies and general trends,
and she had always enjoyed Wang Tianzong's pampering. It seemed that she had never done anything for the Wang family of Beihai.
She didn't need to do anything. Just as Wang Tianzong said. She was beautiful, good at cooking, and could look after the house. Shouldn't a real hostess be like this?
Even if she didn't do anything, as long as she was still in Mount Dibbing, Wang Tianzong would have no worries wherever he went.
And did she really not do anything? No one knew. But at least Wang Tianzong knew.
Many years ago, when he was about to break through to the invincible realm, if Summer Solstice hadn't gone to the border and made up for the vital combat capability of the invincible realm in the lineup to besiege Li Guangtu, it might not have been the Li family but the Wang family of Beihai who had committed treason and collapsed. If she hadn't tried her best to break Li Guangtu's murderous weapon, Infinite Sky, at the very beginning, she wouldn't have been knocked down from the invincible realm, and she wouldn't have been seriously injured to this day.
She had yet to recover from her injuries. But when Wang Tianzong was absent, she could still draw her sword.
She had once fallen from the invincible realm, and her foundation had been completely loose. But after more than 20 years of accumulation, even if she was in a special state, when she pulled out the sword now, the sword intent that burst out was still at the peak of the invincible realm. Summer Solstice stretched out her hand, her slender and white fingers grasped behind her. It was a famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai that had not been seen for many years. The body of the sword was slender and simple. The sword was named Autumn Water. The dim yellow sword light scattered in all directions, covering every corner in front of the Emperor Hall. The men of sacrifice who were determined to die were still charging forward.
Everyone recognized Xianxia's sword.
In the dim sword light, it was the 24 moves of sword belonging to the Li family.
Ninth blade, Dusk.
With their background, dying under this sword was truly an indescribable irony and desolation.
In an instant, the lightning in the dusky world became frenzied.
The blue lightning bloomed densely, as if to tear the whole dusk apart. Summer Solstice's palm suddenly grasped the hilt of the sword. The sound of the long sword being unsheathed echoed over Mount Dibbing. The setting sun gathered at the end of the sword. Energy instantly leaped up again.
The night had been completely dispelled. The top of Mount Dibbing was full of the dusk. The dusk gently shook.
All the lightning was directly suppressed, and there was no sound. The autumn water behind Summer Solstice was unsheathed.
The sword light was bright.
The sword intent surged again. The dim yellow sword light seemed soft, but it quietly twisted the armor of all the men of sacrifice. Blood spurted out of the armor, reflecting in the dusk, which looked extremely cruel. The remaining group of men of sacrifice was still charging. Even if they were to die, they would die on the way of charging. Summer Solstice's cold and slightly dignified expression did not change at all, but her delicate eyebrows were slightly raised. The long sword Autumn Water was completely unsheathed.
The sword light was brilliant.
The dim dusk suddenly became chaotic and violent. High up in the sky, the setting sun gathered a lot of rich sword energy and went straight up as the bright sword light was unsheathed.
The dusk dissipated in the frenzy.
The light on Mount Dibbing multiplied, suppressing the lights, getting brighter and brighter. It was already late at night in Beihai province. But Mount Dibbing lit up with real light. Sunshine. The setting sun gathered by the sword intent had completely turned into a scorching sun. Flowers bloomed under the scorching sun. Summer Solstice's graceful body rotated wildly with the sword, like a grand but extremely dangerous dance. The monstrous sword light spread like a flower. Summer Solstice rotated faster and faster. The scorching sun in the sky had completely disappeared, and the light on Mount Dibbing was even brighter. A little flame appeared at the tip of Summer Solstice's sword. As her figure danced, the flame suddenly created a wave of fire that could cover everything. The monstrous sword light raged with the raging fire. The last group of men of sacrifice didn't even have time to do anything. They were directly swallowed by the fire wave and turned into nothingness in the sword intent all over the sky.
The eighth blade, Burning Sky. Summer Solstice's body shook.
The spreading fire began to converge toward her. On the top of Mount Dibbing, in the gathering fire, a touch of snow suddenly rose. The moment the sword light as cold as snow lit up, Mount Dibbing was full of thunder. The violent blue electric arcs covered everything without warning. Just at the moment when Summer Solstice withdrew her sword and relaxed. This was a real sneak attack and assassination. The means were not despicable and insidious, but the timing was just right. Saint broke open the alloy armor on his body. This was his fastest sword, and also his strongest sword in the state of Holy Disciple. The sword intent of this sword was still at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but its destructive power seemed to have entered the invincible realm. Military Counselor was a little slower than Saint. General and Duke rushed up side by side. Thunder light. There was only thunder light. The thunder light all over the mountains and plains was completely connected, like a sky covering the night sky, directly shrouding summer solstice. Summer solstice's dress fluttered wildly in the violent sword intent. She held autumn water tightly in her hand, pointed the sword down, and suddenly stabbed into the Emperor Palace under her feet. From the moment she appeared to the present, she only made 3 sword moves. The moment the 3rd sword move was made, summer solstice's aura instantly became weak. But the invisible and intangible sword intent smashed the thunderlight all over the sky in an instant. The setting sun dissipated. The scorching sun dissipated. The thunder light dissipated. The top of Mount Dibing became the purest and deepest black, and only the sword intent was whistling in the quietest darkness. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai. Sword of King Wei. In the thick darkness, there was a clear sound of weapons breaking. The sword light swept over Mount Dibing. The thunder light lit up in the darkness for a moment, and then disappeared completely. Summer Solstice tightly pursed her red lips and endured it. Her cold eyes looked directly to the east of Mount Dibing. In the night that was restored to peace, 2 figures, each carrying a figure, staggered and disappeared into the night. The wind on Mount Dibing blew over. The sound of the waves at the foot of the mountain also became clear. The corner of Summer Solstice's mouth moved. She couldn't help spitting out a mouthful of blood, which dyed the eaves of Emperor Palace red. She looked at her blood with complicated eyes. The sneak attack tonight was nothing to her. She was at the peak of the invincible realm. Except for the experts at the peak of the invincible realm, almost no one could hurt her. No one could hurt her tonight. However, her body could no longer bear the burden of her own sword intent. Summer Solstice sighed softly. Her figure flickered and returned to Emperor Palace. The internal security forces of the Wang family of Beihai, who reacted the fastest, had already rushed to the top of the mountain. But they only saw the door of Emperor Palace slowly closing. It's okay. Summer Solstice's cold and indifferent voice came from inside. Don't inform Tianzong. The sword energy on Mount Dibing fell. The sword energy on Mount Dibing had reached its peak. The sword intent was like the sea. The sky and the sea were aligned. In the deep and silent darkness, Mount Dibing, West Lake, and everything else seemed to have completely disappeared. Only the turbulent sea of swords was left. Vibration. The whole Mount Dibing was shaking under the completely violent sword intent. The whole sea of swords had gone completely crazy. The vast sword intent fell endlessly in the air, and the sword energy rose into the sky. The mighty sword shadows shuttled in every corner of Mount Dibing. The flowers, plants, and trees on Mount Dibing, which had been nourished by the fate of the dragon vein, had been completely shattered and disappeared in the turbulence of the Sea of Swords. The once flourishing Mount Dibing was now only a bare mountain. The mountain gradually cracked in the raging sword intent, and the endless sword shadows did not seem to have a tendency to dissipate and reduce at all. Instead, there were more and more. Li Honghe moved forward slowly in the Sea of Swords. His pace was extremely steady, but also extremely slow. He didn't know where Wang Tianzong was, but he knew Wang Tianzong's character. So he went straight forward. As long as he went forward to the end, no matter where Wang Tianzong was, he could see him. The sword intent was like a tsunami. The surging tide rose. The surging tide fell. Li Honghe had walked hundreds of meters in the Sea of Swords. His body was always shining. The extremely rich sword intent turned into the purest light. Li Honghe was like a ball of light in the Sea of Swords. He was moving forward. The Sea of Swords was retreating. Mount Dibing, which had been ravaged by the infinite sword energy, had been unrecognizable. Everything had disappeared, including flowers, trees, and wooden houses. Wherever the sword energy passed, the land was completely dried up, and all the water was completely evaporated. Cracks appeared on the dry land one after another. The cracks spread from the top of the mountain and gradually spread to the foot of the mountain. The Li family's cemetery was the only intact place on Mount Dibing. Li Honghe was standing in front of the cemetery and moving forward. He was moving forward. The Sea of Swords was retreating. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of sword shadows hit the ball of light around Li Honghe without reservation. Blood bloomed all over Li Honghe's body. But the overwhelming sea of swords that swept through Mount Dibing kept retreating. It kept retreating. Countless sword shadows were thrown into the sky messily and fell back again. There were more and more sword shadows. The light around Li Honghe was getting brighter and brighter. All the sword shadows were lifted up by him along the way. A huge wave of thousands of meters high had appeared in front of Li Honghe. They were all swords. There were so many swords that made people desperate. The edge of the sword flashed with dark and deep light. The sword energy surrounded it, and the reincarnation seemed to be endless. The sword energy was like a sea. This was not Wang Tianzong's 6 paths of reincarnation. But it was definitely a sword strike with all his strength. With the Howren sword energy in this sword strike alone, he deserved to be ranked first on the divine list. Li Honghe was still moving forward. His speed gradually accelerated. So the sea of swords was retreating, but the huge wave at the front was getting higher and higher. Thousands of meters. It was getting higher and higher. It seemed to go straight to the sky. Li Honghe walked silently. The light on his body was constant, as if he was going to overturn the whole sea of swords by himself. The sea of swords was like a storm, like a huge wave, with its sharpness shocking the world and endless. There was more and more blood on Li Honghe's body. His aura began to weaken, but the sword intent around him was getting stronger and stronger. Li Tianlan watched all this quietly. The sea of swords was forced back by Li Honghe in front of him. Li Tianlan's position was absolutely safe. He watched the sword light sweep through the world like a tide. He watched the blood burst out on his grandfather's body. He watched the huge wave that could split the sky keep rising. He watched a large number of sword shadows break and reunite. He just watched. His eyes were calm. Calm without the slightest emotion. This was the broken reincarnation he had never seen before. The sword energy was as abundant as the sea. And Li Honghe had the power to overturn the whole sea of swords. Li Tianlan had already seen the outcome of this battle. There was no face-to-face battle in this battle. It was purely a contest between sword intent and sword energy. His grandfather could overturn the whole sea of swords, but he couldn't completely defeat it. When the whole sea of swords was overturned, it was also the moment when the sea of swords was completely overturned. At that time, the sea would become the sky. The unprecedented sword intent would completely burst out in the most brilliant way. Li Tianlan didn't know what he could do at that time. But he wanted to try. He had to try. Li Honghe's speed was getting faster and faster. The light formed by the sword intent around him gradually became erratic and unstable. But in the light, the sword intent was suddenly much stronger than before. A large number of sword shadows flew backward in front of him, drifting like fallen leaves. A clear and long whistle suddenly sounded in the heavy sea of swords. The long whistle came from the foot of Lonely Mountain. But the sound that was enough to break gold and stone reached the top of the mountain in an instant. People at the foot of the mountain climbed up. The sword shadows all over Lonely Mountain surged down the mountain at the same time. Standing in Li Honghe's position, he couldn't see Situ Xianxia at the foot of the mountain. But in an instant, he was able to grasp the changes in the sea of swords at the foot of the mountain. Brilliant, like eternal pure light, suddenly lit up on him. The extremely dazzling light shone in the endless sea of swords. Li Honghe's figure suddenly rose into the sky. His figure kept moving forward. The pure light spread unscrupulously in front of him. The whole Lonely Mountain became a world of black and white in the blink of an eye. Li Honghe's body flew in the sea of swords. He had no sword in his hand. However, his entire person had turned into the sharpest sword. Brilliant, like eternal light, was broken in the darkness. The sword intent around Li Honghe condensed, leaving only sharpness. 23rd blade, break eternity. The endless sea of swords began to go berserk like never before. The neat sword shadows were swept away by the condensed sword intent to the extreme and rushed into the sky in disorder. The sword shadows gathered like dragons and kept attacking the sword intent around Li Honghe. Then they were swept away again. The sea was undulating, and the whole sea was rising. Forward. He kept moving forward. Li Honghe seemed to have completely incarnated into a sword. The sea of swords was lifted up, and the monstrous waves rushed into the sky. Li Honghe didn't stop at all and rushed directly to the end of the sea. There was no Wang Tianzong at the end of the sea.
But Li Honghe saw Situ Tsungyue covered in blood. The sword shadows around Situ Tsungyue were rising. The entire sea of swords rose into the air after a brief moment of chaos. One after another, the sword shadows were neatly arranged again. The sea of swords became the sky. It was a sky with a radius of thousands of meters, covering the whole lonely mountain. Looking up, the inverted sword shadows were dense and scattered all over the sky. Li Honghe, whose breath was constantly weakening, had only a dignified look in his eyes. There was a breeze on Lonely Mountain. The endless sword shadows in the sky shimmered in the wind. The light lit up one by one. A weak light, a sharp light, and a cold light. The light occupied all of Li Honghe's vision, like stars all over the sky. Wang Tianzong's voice finally sounded in the nothingness again. It was simple. Senior Li, goodbye. The stars began to fall. They rolled down like the collapsing and pouring Milky Way. His face changed dramatically, and he took a step forward subconsciously. A faintly discernible sigh suddenly rang out in the flourishing galaxy. Then a sword intent that was almost similar to but not exactly the same as the Milky Way appeared on Lonely Mountain and beside Li Honghe without warning. The Milky Way was falling. The ground lit up. The shining light could almost cover everything. The light below was as far as the Milky Way above was. The light and the falling Milky Way kept merging, neither advancing nor retreating. The dazzling light gradually became soft and cold. A slender and elegant figure appeared in front of Li Honghe and Situ Tsungyue. He was bathed in light and completely protected the two behind him. The shining Milky Way was still falling. It became more and more determined. The cold and soft light enveloped the whole lonely mountain, shining and rippling against the falling character. The light was as cold as the moon, coldly accommodating the falling stars from the sky. Humph! In the high sky of the nothingness, Wang Tianzong's voice sounded again with faint anger. Fengting, are you going to intervene? Lin Fengting. Li Tianlan froze for a moment. Situ Tsungyue also froze for a moment. Everyone in the Li family was a little stunned. I have no choice. In the light, Lin Fengting's voice sounded. His voice was calm and emotionless, just like his mood. Wang Tianzong fell silent. He had no choice. He understood this sentence. There was no choice, and there was no way out. Everything he did was something he had to do. Wang Tianzong's figure appeared high in the sky. The star-like sword shadows were still falling wildly. Wang Tianzong stood high in the sky, as if stepping on the stars. He glanced at Lin Fengting. In the light, even he could not see Lin Fengting's expression. His figure fell for a while. The bright and shining sword shadows became as black as ink in an instant. That was the deepest and purest black. The vast night sky seemed to be torn apart in an instant, and it rained in the nothingness. It was the wildest rainstorm in the dark world in decades. The heavy rain fell with a crash. Lin Fengting still stood where he was. But the light formed by the sword intent around him was constantly rising. The light was constantly changing, turning into the most holy milky white. The milky white light enveloped the whole lonely mountain and continued to rise, like a white torrent breaking through the darkness. Lin Fengting reached for the money. His 5 fingers were all open, as if he could control everything. The milky white light completely dispersed with his movements, and suddenly turned into 2 long rivers flowing in the nothingness. The long river crossed the night sky with different colors. It was as cold as the bright moon. It was as hot as the sun. The light of the sun and the moon spread wildly in the dark black tide at the same time. The lonely mountain in the night was instantly illuminated as bright as day. The sun and the moon were blending and converging, rising and falling in the black tide all over the sky. The black tide was still surging. Chapter 327. The sun and the moon rose and fell. The black tide was turbulent and violent. Over Lonely Mountain, it was like a rainstorm that fell late at night but was illuminated by the sun and the moon at the same time. The heavy rain fell overwhelmingly. The surging sword intent was deep and dark, but it was clear and sharp under the light of the sun and the moon. Extreme light and darkness intertwined. Everything on Lonely Mountain was like a phenomenon of heaven and earth. Lin Fengting did not move. Wang Tianzong did not move. But the completely different sword intent kept spreading, and it kept surging in every corner of the entire Lonely Mountain. This was the confrontation and entanglement at the peak of martial arts. The broken reincarnation had completely disappeared. The black tide and the sun and the moon were all sword intent. There was no unique skill, but the purest and most violent sword intent. The black tide, the rainstorm, the cold moon, the scorching sun. They were all swords. The so-called light and darkness. The so-called phenomenon of heaven and earth. They were all swords. Li Tianlan stared at every scene of the flowing light in front of him. His body was trembling slightly, and a trace of excitement gradually appeared on his pale face. His body subconsciously took a few steps forward, and his eyes were even a little intoxicated. He could no longer see the light and darkness. There was only sword intent in his eyes. If the essence of the world was silence, if the peak of martial arts was illusion, in the silence and illusion, sword moves, sword energy, everything could not exist. In sword arts, only the purest sword intent and sword momentum were the only real. Li Tianlan's world was quiet, and his sight was all illusion. So the seemingly colorful but extremely pure sword intent became the most gorgeous and magnificent picture in his eyes. Li Tianlan sat down. If the peak of martial arts was illusion, it was meaningless to see it or not. He closed his eyes. In the blink of an eye, he directly entered the deepest level of meditation. The endless sword intent became clearer and clearer in his conscious perception. At this moment, he seemed to be touching the essence of the sword intent of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan. The essence of sword intent. The sword intent of the 24 moves of sword was far greater than that of the Wang family of Beihai, and its light was like the sun and the moon. But the sun and the moon would also be silent. Silent in the pure darkness. Any light that could dissipate in the darkness was illusion. Only darkness was real. Therefore, although the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was not as grand as the 24 moves of sword, it was far more real than the 24 moves of sword. Reality and illusion. This was the essence of the highest level of martial arts, surpassing the level of sword intent, the strength of defense, and all other basic essences. This was the first time Li Tianlan had seen the truth. Illusions could reach the end of martial arts. You can be real too. At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly thought of deity he met in heaven capital. Thinking of his sword light that was as vast as the sun and moon. Thinking of his truth that was as dark as eternity. He had touched upon the path of the strongest martial arts, but he could no longer reach the end. It was only at this moment that he vaguely understood the ambition of God. Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, Shen. Every one of them had talent comparable to a genius. The world wouldn't exist just for one person. Everyone had the potential to become a true prodigy. Li Tianlan sat quietly. He seemed to have fallen into the deepest state of nirvana. The entanglement of the black tide and the sun and the moon seemed to be endless. Li Tianlan's figure began to disappear in the sword intent all over the mountains and plains. In a trance, he seemed to have completely left the lock of Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting's sword intent. It was a great victory. It had been 3 years. Li Tianlan hadn't really shown his strength after his return, but his martial arts had taken half a step forward. This half step was very small, but it had an extraordinary meaning. At this moment, Li Tianlan sat there. His figure had never been blurred, but it had never been clearer. It was like heaven and earth. It was always the most real existence. But because it was too grand, it would always be subconsciously ignored. Wang Tianzong noticed Li Tianlan's change at the first time. Above the black tide, a sharp and cold snort sounded like thunder. In an instant, the black rain all over the sky stopped. The rain-like sword shadows all stopped around the light of the sun and the moon. The sword shadows began to gather wildly. The sword sea turned into a starry sky. The starry sky turned into a rainstorm. The rainstorm turned into a sword sea again. All the sounds on Lonely Mountain disappeared completely. The despairing silence began to spread, and only the sun and the moon remained the same. Looking from a distance, the sword sea was like a dark halo flowing around the sun and the moon, covering the entire Lonely Mountain. Li Tianlan didn't move. Lin Fengting's expression suddenly became extremely serious. Tianzong, do you have to do this? Lin Fengting said in a deep voice. The cause of the past is the effect of today. I have no choice. Wang Tianzong's voice was cold. In fact, cause and effect were no longer important. It didn't matter whether the Li family owed the Wang family of Beihai or not. Li Honghe might feel guilty to the Wang family of Beihai. But it would not change anything. Since there was no turning back, he could only make the best of the mistake. Right and wrong could not decide everything. After all, the enemy could only be the enemy. The endless sea of swords rippled for a moment. Countless sword shadows trembled. Around the light of the sun and the moon, the sword sea formed a wave. The wave did not spread outward. Instead, it collapsed inward. In a trance, there was a storm between heaven and earth in the huge tide. An indescribable storm swept through everything along with an earth-shattering boom. The darkness began to become more real than ever. The densely packed sword shadows became extremely crazy in an instant. The storm destroyed everything in the sword shadows. The monstrous black tide rushed towards the sun and the moon in the center without any hesitation. All the sword intent poured out in the most violent way in an instant. The sword sea was collapsing, and the sun and the moon were expanding. The entire lonely mountain was shaking and cracking in the extreme outbreak of sword intent. The light of the sun and the moon spread out to the limit. All the sounds disappeared completely in an instant. Only the storm and the tide were still the same. A dazzling white spot suddenly lit up in the center of the sun and the moon. In the silent world, the sun and the moon seemed to explode completely. The white spot suddenly became a dazzling light everywhere. The light swallowed the darkness. The darkness shattered the light. A void appeared in the sky where light and darkness intertwined. The void was formed and shattered. Light and darkness intertwined. The whole sky became mottled with black and white intertwined. In the absolute chaos, Lin Fengting seemed to move. He took a step forward. But the landing point was not in front of him, but directly appeared in the sky thousands of meters above. Wang Tianzong also moved. For the first time, there was a harsh sound of gold and iron colliding in the air. The two long swords seemed to have collided once, but no one could see it clearly. The mottled black and white sky surged and exploded. A blazing white halo appeared in the sky, and all the sword intent kept spreading out in the halo. The mountain collapsed and the earth cracked. This was a real mountain collapsed and the earth cracked. There was only light and darkness in the soaring sword intent, and nothing could be seen clearly. The violent sword intent finally began to dissipate. A large amount of smoke and dust spread after the sword intent, covering the field of vision. The smoke and dust gradually dissipated. Li Tianlan was still sitting. Li Tianlan stood in front of Li Honghe and Situ Tsungyue. Everyone seemed to have changed their positions, but also seemed to have not changed. Only Wang Tianzong was still floating in the air, cold and majestic, like a god. Lonely Mountain. There was no Lonely Mountain anymore. The whole Lonely Mountain was cut to the ground by this sword. Everything that used to be completely disappeared and no longer existed. Only the Li family's cemetery remained after Lin Fengting's sword light. But only the cemetery was left. The whole Lonely Mountain seemed to have never existed. The ground of Lonely Mountain, which had become flat, was still cracking. Horrifying cracks appeared one after another on the wall. Wisps of white mist rose from the cracks. The mist appeared quickly. But it never condensed. All the mist seemed to have a master. As soon as it appeared, it began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was surrounded by mist, and everything became blurred. 3 years ago, Great Master Wu Wei planted a flower. It was called the Dragon Vein Flower. That flower was the key to Li Tianlan's resurrection. The flower was picked, but its roots disappeared in Mount Qingyun and became the flourishing flowers and plants of the whole Lonely Mountain. Now that Lonely Mountain completely disappeared, the remaining luck suddenly turned into white mist again and began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong watched all this quietly. His eyes narrowed tightly, and for the first time, there was a touch of undisguised fear and killing intent in his eyes. Now Li Tianlan was still weak. But his future was worthy of everyone's real attention. In Wang Tianzong's eyes, Li Tianlan was no longer a threat. He was an opponent. He was a real enemy. Wang Tianzong took a step forward in the air. One step was 100 meters, and he almost reached Li Tianlan. Do you want to make another sword move? Lin Fengting blocked Wang Tianzong's way forward. His face was a little pale, but his aura was still strong. In the final collision, although Lonely Mountain completely disappeared, the Li family still existed. The people of the Li family and the Li family's cemetery survived because they were shrouded by his sword intent. This was the first time that Lin Fengting had completely shown his attitude. When the Li family was destroyed, he didn't know. After the Li family was destroyed, everything was too late. After more than 20 years, Lin Fengting finally stood in front of the Li family. No right or wrong. The dark world didn't need right or wrong or understanding. Only cause and effect were the most real. Fengting, is this your attitude? Wang Tianzong looked into Lin Fengting's eyes. Yes. Lin Fengting said calmly. Is this also the attitude of the Lin clan? Wang Tianzong asked again. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. He didn't know the meaning of Wang Tianzong's words. This could be understood as a threat. It could also be understood as a simple inquiry. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled. If you really want to understand it in this way, it's not impossible. The Wang family of Beihai was indeed powerful. They deserved to be called the first force in the dark world. Although the headquarters of the Lin clan stood aloof from the world. But with the branches scattered all over the world, it was also a giant. Even if Lin Fengting could barely integrate the branches everywhere, there would be many internal problems. But there were also internal problems in the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong's pupils contracted, and he said in a deep voice, "Why? I have no choice." Lin Fengting shook his head. Wang Tianzong knew that he had asked a nonsense question. Since there was no choice, anything he said was nonsense. The famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai behind him, "Listen to the sea," shook slightly. The bright sword blade suddenly came out of the sheath. Lin Fengting suddenly raised his eyebrows. This peak invincible realm expert, who had always been playing in the world and seemed to live outside the mortal world, was always free and easy. But as he raised his eyebrows, there was a trace of indescribable sharpness in him. "Do you want to fight again?" Lin Fengting asked. "You are no match for me." Wang Tianzong's tone was straightforward and calm. He was stronger than Lin Fengting. Whether it was much stronger or slightly stronger, strength was strength. All the people of the Li family walked over quietly. In Wang Tianzong's eyes, they might be nonentities. But here, there was no room for them to retreat. The earth-shattering sword strike just now was enough to leave a huge shadow on them. But the nonentities in the shadow could also become warriors. Li Honghe, who was covered in blood, also came over. Situ Zhongyue followed him. Wang Tianzong was still calm. It was a calmness of absolute confidence. The only purpose of his coming to Lin and today was to kill Li Honghe, end the feud with the Li family, and eliminate the threat that the Li family might bring to the Wang family of Beihai in the future. He had noticed that Gu Xingyun had withdrawn from the battlefield. But it didn't matter. Even if Lin Fengting stood in front of him at this time. But he could still kill Li Honghe. Why didn't he? Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and glanced at Li Tianlan, who was still sitting on the ground. The white mist had gradually thinned. Li Tianlan also opened his eyes at the same time. His eyes were calm and deep, and he looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. Wang Tianzong was motionless, as if he was thinking. Li Tianlan seemed to want to say something, but before he finished speaking, he spat out a mouthful of blood and dyed the dry land red. Wang Tianzong's pupils suddenly contracted. Li Tianlan reached out his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He chuckled and said, "Comfortable. I still underestimated you." Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan and said softly. His voice sounded like a sigh. His sword intent hurt Li Tianlan at the very beginning. But the blood just now was because Li Tianlan was watching his and Lin Fengting's sword intent and hurting his mind. It was not a serious problem. At least compared with the understanding he got, this kind of injury was much lighter. A young man in his early 20s could see the essence of the peak sword intent of swordsmanship. Wang Tianzong felt that he had underestimated Li Tianlan too much. The title of the heavenly son of Jianghu state did seem to be worthy of it. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan saw the essence of the supreme swordsmanship. He also vaguely saw Li Tianlan's path. When did you recultivate the 4 realms of martial arts? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. Li Tianlan's eyes slightly narrowed. 3 years ago. It only took 3 years? Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. It was 2 years. Li Tianlan said. Wang Tianzong's mouth twitched. The time is too short. The foundation is unstable. There is still time in the future. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Wang Tianzong had nothing to say. He recultivated the 4 realms of martial arts in 2 years. Li Tianlan's foundation was indeed unstable. But Li Tianlan took the 4 realms of martial arts as the most basic foundation and starting point. Directly jumped out of the 4 realms of martial arts and embarked on a new path. The 4 realms of martial arts were everyone's road to invincibility, but for Li Tianlan, they became the initial foundation. The foundation was unstable? Even if it was unstable, it was much more stable than others. Would you like to join the Wang family of Beihai? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and then asked. He asked without changing his expression. The Wang family of Beihai has never owed the Li family anything. As long as you are willing to join the Wang family of Beihai, all the grievances can be written off, and I can give you the power to be on an equal footing with Xianxia. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm and solemn. Li Honghe's face suddenly changed, and he said subconsciously, "The Li family will not be anyone's vassal." His tone was a little fast, a little hasty, and even a little out of control. The Li family? Wang Tianzong twitched the corner of his mouth with a faint smile. He didn't look at Li Honghe, but at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was looking at his grandfather who was covered in blood. He slowly walked to Li Honghe's side, held the old man who was shaking a little and whispered, "The blood can't be shed in vain." That was his answer. Wang Tianzong's eyes flashed. Lin Fengting, Li Honghe, Situ Tsunghua. Plus more than a dozen elites from the Li family. And Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong kept calculating in his heart. He couldn't kill Lin Fengting. He didn't want to kill him. But if he wanted to kill others, Lin Fengting might not be able to stop him. The premise was that he was willing to pay the price. The price might be heavy. But compared with the Li family, which was more important? The temperature in Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually decreased, and he began to become determined. "You refused me again." Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. "I'm just telling a fact." Li Tianlan said, "Until now, I've determined my future path, or the path of the East Emperor Palace." He looked at Wang Tianzong. He suddenly smiled and said, "Your Majesty, after the maneuver, the East Emperor Palace will go to Wuxia to develop. How about that? Wuxia Province. The stability of the Southeast Group was second only to Beihai Province. That was the absolute base camp of Beihai Province, the real back garden. It seemed that the East Emperor Palace was courting death by going to Wuxia. But Wang Tianzong's calm face twisted in an instant. This was a declaration of war. Li Tianlan declared war on the Wang family of Beihai. Moreover, the location he had chosen was so subtle. "Are you going to Wuxia?" Wang Tianzong asked. "How about it?" Li Tianlan's tone was calm. "No." Before Wang Tianzong could speak, a young and cold female voice suddenly sounded. A white figure walked up the lonely mountain, which had become a piece of flat land. Chapter 328. Li Tianlan instinctively looked in the direction of the sound. The sword intent on the flattened lonely mountain dissipated, but some sword energy still remained. The broken and out-of-control sword intent filled every corner of the surroundings bit by bit. The night was slightly turbulent, and the starlight fell. Everything in sight was a little blurred in the faint light. In his sight, the long white dress gently fluttered in the night breeze, with a delicate fragrance that Li Tianlan was familiar with but almost forgotten. In a trance, this picture was as beautiful as the most beautiful dream. Li Tianlan froze in place. His heart beat wildly, and his mind was blank. He stared at the figure getting closer and closer to him. Qin Wei Bai. Li Tianlan had imagined the scene of the two meeting again many times. But in any case, he did not expect that when he was most unprepared, she would appear in front of him so suddenly and naturally. His body was stiff, and the corners of his mouth trembled slightly, but he could not say a word. The residual broken sword energy all over the sky was still a scenery in his eyes. And the slim white figure walked in the residual sword intent, but it seemed that all the scenery was completely lit up in an instant. Qin Wei Bai was still so simple, but so perfect. Her long hair was tied up, and a green emerald hairpin was inserted in her hair casually. It swayed with her hurried footsteps, with intoxicating brilliance. Lonely Mountain, which had been razed to the ground by a sword, was desolate and dilapidated. The sword energy drifted around casually. The bare and almost dead land did not hide her charm at all. Instead, it made her look more dreamy and dazzling. She walked to Li Tianlan. Everything became clear. A clear face. A clear, delicate fragrance. She looked at Li Tianlan. It was a beauty and gentleness that could topple the night sky and make the stars dim. Her eyes were still a little eager, but she always paid attention to her tone. "You can't go to Wuxia," she said softly, not forcefully, but with a kind of softness similar to coquettishness. Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai motionlessly. It had been 3 years since the final battle of Heaven Capital. He had never seen her again, nor had he heard from her. It was just like when she walked into his world quietly and left without saying a word. Li Tianlan felt that he could only accept everything she did. He could not refuse her approach, nor could he stop her from going away. He could only accept it. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and looked at Qin Weibai, who appeared in front of him again. She was so close. She was so close that as long as he reached out, he would be able to pull her into his arms. She told him not to go to Wuxia. The corners of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. His voice became extremely dry, emotionless, and even devoid of warmth. "Why?" he asked. Qin Weibai's face suddenly turned pale. Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting raised their eyebrows at the same time. What Li Tianlan asked was why. Not why. It was a difference of one word, but it was two completely different emotions. "I don't want you to go to Wuxia," Qin Weibai whispered. Li Tianlan smiled. "You don't want to." He recalled everything about him and Qin Weibai. She wanted to walk into her own world, so she became her own woman. She wanted him to enter Sai City, so she became the young governor of Sai City. She wanted to distance herself from him. As a result, the several heavenly kings of Samsara and Tiandu quietly disappeared before the decisive battle. After the decisive battle, she didn't want to have the slightest connection with his future, so she completely cut off all connections between him and her. Now she appeared in front of him again and said that she didn't want him to go to Wuxia. She expressed what she wanted or didn't want in the most direct way, which was sometimes gentle, but sometimes so cruel. Li Tianlan suddenly found himself so powerless. He couldn't resist Qin Weibai's gentleness, nor could he stop her cruelty. He didn't like this feeling. This feeling of being controlled, approached and abandoned, from beginning to end. He never had the feeling of being in charge. He didn't understand Qin Weibai's choice every time. But he really cared about her too much. The more he cared about her, the more dissatisfied he was. Li Tianlan's heart gradually became quiet. He felt that his body began to cool down inch by inch from his fingertips. His limbs, torso, heart, and even his voice became extremely cold. "Who are you?" He looked at Qin Weibai and asked. This sentence was like an extremely sharp knife, cutting open his chest in an instant and leaving a bloody scar on his heart. It hurt, but it was almost twisted with pleasure. "My future has nothing to do with you. Then when you stand in front of me, who are you?" "Who are you?" Qin Weibai's face suddenly lost all the blood. Li Tianlan turned directly, looked at Wang Tianzong, and said word by word, "I will go to Wuxia after the maneuver." "No." The pale Qin Weibai said again. "You can't go to Wuxia. You will die." "Who are you?" Li Tianlan didn't look back and ask the same question. This cruel question seemed to be dripping blood. "I'm your wife. I won't let you go to Wuxia. You can't go." Qin Weibai bit her lip and took a step forward, directly hugging Li Tianlan from behind. "Don't be angry with me, okay? I won't allow you to go to Wuxia, please." She pulled Li Tianlan hard with her small hands, as if she wanted to turn his body around. "Hug me. I won't make you angry in the future." Li Tianlan's body trembled slightly. He tried to maintain his inner anger and resentment, but the delicate fragrance around him seemed to have magic power. It completely destroyed all his reason, his anger, his confusion, and his determination in the first place. Everything became no resistance in front of Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan suddenly turned around and held Qin Weibai in his arms. Completely ignoring other people's gazes, he held Qin Weibai's small face and kissed her directly. Qin Weibai's body stiffened for a moment, then she obediently reached out and put her arms around his neck, responding carefully. A blush as bright as the morning glow quietly climbed up her face. Li Tianlan's unconscious movement messed up her long hair that was tied up. The turquoise hairpin slipped out of her hair and fell on the dry land. Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, Li Honghe, and Situ Tsungyue. The four people's eyes almost followed the turquoise hairpin from top to bottom. The hairpin rolled on the ground. As Li Tianlan moved forward, Qin Weibai raised a small foot and directly stepped on the hairpin. The corners of the four invincible realm experts' mouths twitched at the same time. Lin Fengting coughed dryly. Qin Weibai, who finally realized that the occasion was not right, gently pushed Li Tianlan, tilted her head and whispered, "Wait for the night." "It's night now." Li Tianlan's voice was rough. Qin Weibai gently raised her eyebrows and glanced at Li Tianlan. Her cheeks were red, and she said with a faint smile, "Yes, what do you want to do?" The question was so direct that Li Tianlan suddenly held back all his movements. He took a deep look at Qin Weibai, took a deep breath, and did not speak. Qin Weibai lay in Li Tianlan's arms and whispered, "You're not angry anymore, are you?" Li Tianlan snorted coldly and remained silent. "Then am I your wife?" Qin Weibai asked again. "What do you think?" Li Tianlan glared at her. "Are you done making out?" Wang Tianzong's voice sounded at an inappropriate time. Li Tianlan was suddenly shocked, and his heart fluctuated violently. Holding Qin Weibai, he ignored Wang Tianzong for a moment. Qin Weibai turned to look at Wang Tianzong in Li Tianlan's arms. She gently squatted down and picked up the turquoise hairpin on the ground. The hairpin fell to the ground and was stepped on. After picking it up, it was still free of dust and had a soft green luster. Qin Weibai casually tidied her long hair and put the hairpin back on her head. Her movements were elegant and soft, and her aura gradually changed. In a short period of time, she seemed to change from the little woman in Li Tianlan's arms to the number 2 figure of Samsara Palace. "What are you still doing here?" Qin Weibai looked at Wang Tianzong and said in a flat tone. A strong killing intent suddenly flashed through Wang Tianzong's eyes. Qin Weibai asked him what he was still doing here. The other meaning of this sentence was that there was nothing he could do here. Wang Tianzong looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai was still held in Li Tianlan's arms. But she was no longer the little woman who was nervous and a little careful just now. Qin Weibai in Li Tianlan's arms was as strong and cold as a queen at this moment. Wang Tianzong looked at the turquoise hairpin in Qin Weibai's hair. The green light of the hairpin swayed. It carried a faint but extremely clear glow. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath. If there were only Lin Fengting and Situ Tsungyue, he still dared to gamble and take action. At most, he would pay a heavy price. But at this time, there was Qin Weibai. Everything was unpredictable. Qin Weibai was here. The power of Samsara had come near Lonely Mountain. Qin Weibai came. What about the master of Samsara Palace? Even if the master of Samsara Palace did not take action, Qin Weibai would at least have a top combat capability that could not be ignored. Even if all this could be ignored, Li Tianlan could also exert the power of this turquoise hairpin. The hairpin on Qin Weibai's head seemed to be just an ornament. But it was a murderous weapon belonging to Samsara Palace. Blue Sky Underworld. Blue Sky Underworld fired in Europe 3 years ago. In 3 years, even with the intelligence of the Wang family of Beihai, it was not sure whether Blue Sky Underworld had the energy to fire again. The murderous weapon was the weapon of the nation. The energy storage time of the 12 murderous weapons was the most important secret. If Blue Sky Underworld could fire again, the power of one blow was enough to break the balance in the field. "How is Gu Xingyun?" Wang Tianzong suddenly glanced at Situ Tsungyue and asked. He felt the battle between Gu Xingyun and Situ Tsungyue and heard the roar of the setting sun over West Lake. The weapon of the nation was aimed at the god of war of his country. After this battle, Situ Tsungyue made her position clear, but Sai City also had to pay the price. "I don't know. It's best if he dies," Situ Tsungyue said in a flat tone. Gu Xingyun had just returned from Star State and was already injured. Now he was hit by setting sun head-on. He was lucky not to die. At least he couldn't help Wang Tianzong tonight. Wang Tianzong smiled and said coldly, "If Gu Xingyun doesn't die, what price will Sai City pay? Have you thought about it?" "What about you?" Situ Tsungyue asked calmly. "You came to Lin and tonight but didn't succeed. What price will the Wang family of Beihai pay? Have you thought about it?" Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed, but he did not say much. His figure gradually faded in the ruined lonely mountain, and finally disappeared completely. Sword Emperor's last glance fell on Li Tianlan. His voice echoed in the night sky, plain and clear. East Emperor Palace goes to Wuxia. The Wang family of Beihai welcomes you very much. It depends on whether you dare to come or not. Qin Weibai in Li Tianlan's arms suddenly tightened and looked at Li Tianlan nervously. Li Tianlan did not respond. He just let go of Qin Weibai and bowed deeply to Lin Fengting. Thank you, senior.
He bowed to Situ Zhongyue again and said respectfully, Thank you, Governor.
Qin Weibai stood beside Li Tianlan and bowed to the two with him. Lin Fengting calmly accepted their bows. Chapter 329. In the latter half of the night, Qin Weibai took everyone to a villa area near West Lake. The villa was bought by Qin Weibai a few years ago. As the adopted daughter of Great Master Wu Wei, Qin Weibai often came to Lin An to visit him when he was alive. This villa was her temporary resting place. The villa was not far from Lonely Mountain. When Lonely Mountain was still there, people with good eyesight could even clearly see the lights in the villa from the highest point. Now that Lonely Mountain had collapsed under the sword of Lin Fengting and Wang Tianzong, this villa had temporarily become a place for the Li family to stay. The villa was large and in a good location. The fragrance of flowers was overflowing, and the landscape could be seen. Flaming Fire, who came to Lin An with Qin Weibai, arranged rooms for the remaining elites of the Li family, while Qin Weibai accompanied Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan paid attention to Li Honghe's condition. Li Honghe changed his clothes, but refused to let anyone check his injury. He looked no different from the grandfather in Li Tianlan's memory, but he was very different from the Li Honghe Li Tianlan saw at dusk. There was no difference between him and Li Honghe 3 years ago. There was no difference between him and Li Honghe before the battle tonight. Li Honghe's body was no longer stooped. His body was straight and his hair was gray, but his spirit was extremely strong. He stood quietly in front of the window and looked at West Lake shrouded in moonlight in the night. He seemed to be much younger all of a sudden, giving people a very tall and straight feeling. The more beautiful the surface was, the more fragile the inside was. The worry in Li Tianlan's eyes grew stronger. I'm fine. Noticing his grandson's gaze, Li Honghe smiled and said slowly, You know my state. For me now, the injury is not important. As long as I'm alive, I'll be fine. Li Tianlan walked to Li Honghe's side and looked at his still ruddy and even glowing face. How is it? Li Tianlan asked seriously. It's fine. Li Honghe was silent for a moment and gave a simple answer. What about the specifics? Li Tianlan pursued him relentlessly. Tianzong's sword completely shattered the foundation of my martial arts, but at the same time, it also shattered the sword intent that I had accumulated for countless years. My foundation is completely loose, and when my body loses balance, my strength will grow faster and faster. But now I almost have no sword intent, so even if my strength grows very fast, it will not burst my body for the time being. I still have some time to live. Li Honghe laughed at himself and said, In this case, maybe I will live a little longer than before. It's not a bad thing that I can live. Li Tianlan was silent and didn't seem to know what to say for a moment. I'm afraid I won't be able to help you much in the future. Li Honghe looked at Li Tianlan and said with a smile, But I'm relieved that you have Qin Weibai by your side. Even if I die now, I won't have anything to worry about. Tianlan, I've left you a gift both inside and outside Jianghu State. This is the last thing I can do for you. What gift? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. After your maneuver is over, you will slowly get in touch with it. Li Honghe said softly. He took a deep look at Li Tianlan and patted him on the shoulder. I feel guilty to you, so when you get the gift, you don't have to thank me. He looked in the direction of Lonely Mountain. Lonely Mountain had disappeared. The old man shook his head. It's a pity for Lonely Mountain. Lonely Mountain will be rebuilt. Li Tianlan said softly. Li Honghe said yes with a smile and suddenly asked, Do you still hate the Wang family of Beihai? Li Tianlan was stunned. I don't. He said softly. In fact, I have never hated the Wang family of Beihai. I don't even hate Kunlun City. This is the truth. I don't think they did anything wrong. To the Wang family of Beihai, to Wang Tianzong. He really didn't feel bad. He admired Wang Tianzong's strength, respected his bearing, feared his strength, and sighed with the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai. Only occasionally, he would think of the Wang family of Beihai's indifference. The Wang family of Beihai did not stand idly by. It was the Li family who took the lead in peeping at the Wang family of Beihai. But it didn't matter. All the affection and all the grievances were settled with the battle of Li Guangtu's treason. No matter how affectionate and righteous the Wang family of Beihai was, in Li Tianlan's current position, they were opponents and enemies. Li Tianlan didn't want to judge their good or bad, because it didn't make any sense at all. If he were Wang Tianzong, he would have made the same choice. If he were Gu Xingyun, he would have also set off the treason war on the border. But he was Li Tianlan now, so he must consider the problem from the standpoint of the Li family. There was no absolute right or wrong, only different positions. That was all. They are not wrong, and neither are we. Li Tianlan said softly, since we are enemies, let's be pure and not talk about grievances. Li Honghe nodded and said quietly, that's good. Both the Li family and the Wang family could not turn back. After tonight, even if there were grievances, they would be written off. When summer solstice smashed the Li family's murderous weapon, Infinite Sky, her martial arts foundation was broken by Li Guangtu and she fell from the invincible realm. Tonight, Wang Tianzong returned Li Honghe's sword and also broke his foundation, making him fall from the invincible realm. Lin Fengting saved the Li family, but he did not stop Wang Tianzong from ending the last cause and effect between the Wang family and the Li family. After tonight, the debt between them would truly be cleared. Qin Weibai and Situ Tsungyue were together. In the spacious bedroom, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State's clothes were almost all undone, and she was lying on the bed almost naked. However, such a charming scene was not erotic, but a little shocking. Situ Tsungyue was slowly bleeding all over her body. The tiny blood vessels almost completely dyed her white and tight skin, although she was no longer young. At first glance, Situ Tsungyue's body seemed to be entangled with countless red threads. Qin Weibai took a towel to deal with the wounds on Situ Tsungyue's body, and at the same time, applied the powder little by little. Situ Tsungyue's body was covered with small wounds. The wounds were not deep, but there were a lot of them. Now, as the powder was applied, some of the small wounds began to heal gradually. Flaming Fire was arranging rooms and preparing food for the people of the Li family. Only Qin Weibai could clean Situ Tsungyue's wounds. They are all skin wounds. It's not a big problem. Qin Weibai wiped the blood off Situ Tsungyue's body and said casually, how about the internal injury? Fortunately, it's not too serious. Situ Tsungyue said softly. In the divine list, which determined the ranking by strength, Situ Tsungyue's ranking was far inferior to Gu Xingyun's. If Setting Sun hadn't opened fire without warning, she would never have been Gu Xingyun's opponent. But Setting Sun's blow directly wiped out the huge gap between the two sides' combat strength. Gu Xingyun fought her head-on under the power of Setting Sun, but it was not a big deal for Situ Tsungyue. No matter how big the gap between her and Gu Xingyun was, she was not so weak that she could not even take one blow from him. Although she had suffered some internal injuries, they were not even minor injuries to her. Situ Tsungyue raised her palm and quietly observed the ring worn on her finger. Her hand was slender, white, and tender, and crystal clear. The purple ring on her finger had a natural feeling, as if this ring was born to belong to this pair of hands. Situ Tsungyue looked at it quietly, with a complicated look in her eyes. Reluctant to give it up? Qin Weibai asked without raising her head. This is the murderous weapon Setting Sunday. If it were you, would you be willing to give it up? Situ Tsungyue asked in reply. It's a murderous weapon that can't be fired. Qin Weibai said calmly. A murderous weapon that can't be used is scrap iron. Even if it's used as a cold weapon to fight, it's normal. Why not? Situ Tsungyue was silent. A murderous weapon that couldn't be fired was indeed scrap iron. But the question was how many people in the dark world could see this problem so open-minded? Situ Tsungyue had Setting Sun in her hand. Even if she was ranked at the bottom of the divine list, when Setting Sun could fire, she would not be afraid of the giants at the top of the divine list. For an invincible realm expert, a murderous weapon meant an absolute huge improvement in combat strength. How is Gu Xingyun's injury? After dealing with Situ Tsungyue's injury, Qin Weibai asked in a low voice. Situ Tsongyue put on her clothes silently and thought carefully. She knew Qin Weibai's plan. So she also knew the importance of this problem. He should not die, Situ Tsongyue said, but I'm not sure if Gu Xingyun can stay in the invincible realm. But even if he can stabilize his realm, it will take a long time to stabilize his injury. This is the best result. It's indeed the best result. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and whispered, in that case, there's no need to be reluctant. Even if setting sun is given to Kunlun City, so what? It won't be long before Tianlan gets it back. Situ Tsongyue was still reluctant, but she still nodded. The moment setting sun fired and the purple light burst, Situ Tsongyue already knew the result. Tonight's battle was a conflict in the dark world and also a grudge between the superpowers. But in the end, this was Jianghu State. The Wang family of Beihai, the Li family, Kunlun City, Sai City. It was not an exaggeration to say that this battle was an internal strife in Jianghu State. The Dark World and the Special Warfare System were just a part of Jianghu State. In this world, individual strength was important, but it was definitely not everything. Even someone as strong as Wang Tianzong could not sweep the world alone. He also needed to consider political factors, economic factors, stability, balance and compromise. Situ Tsongyue and Sai City needed to consider these more. Sai City had not entered the secular world before. But as soon as it entered the secular world, it directly used the murderous weapon of Jianghu State to aim at the god of war, the protector of Jianghu State. This matter could not be concealed. It was believed that before dawn, the high-level officials of Jianghu State would express their anger one after another. At this point, even the academics, who had a good relationship with Sai City, would not speak for Sai City. The murderous weapon of the state was aimed at its own people. For such a violation of the rules, Sai City had to give everyone an explanation, and also an explanation that could satisfy Kunlun City. Setting Sun was bound to change owners. This was the most basic thing. No matter how reluctant Situ Tsongyue was, she had to hand over the murderous weapon that had followed her for many years to Kunlun City to appease their anger. A murderous weapon was not even enough. Sai City had occupied the pattern of the Dark World in the northeast of Jianghu State for many years, and it would also be strongly impacted by Kunlun City. From the moment the murderous weapon opened fire, this was a necessary compromise. It was also part of Qin Weibai's plan. How's the state of setting sun? Qin Weibai asked softly. I've stimulated the energy of setting sun to the greatest extent. It will take at least 3 to 4 years for setting sun to store energy again. Situ Tsongyue said calmly. Qin Weibai nodded. After the battle, Gu Xingyun was seriously injured. Kunlun City had one more murderous weapon and expanded its sphere of influence to the northeast. Kunlun City seemed to have greatly increased in strength, but they needed time to digest it. At least before Gu Xingyun recovered from his injury, a murderous weapon that could not fire could not increase the strength of Kunlun City. On the contrary, it would make them weak. In the case that their comprehensive strength was far inferior to the other party, the only thing Qin Weibai and Sai City could do was to sacrifice their existing resources, secretly and quietly exchange some things to protect their core interests. After this battle, Sai City would lose the murderous weapon and even lose the right to speak in the special warfare system of 1 or 2 provinces in the northeast. After paying these prices, the core interest they needed to protect was undoubtedly Li Tianlan. There were gains and losses. Everything is temporary. Qin Weibai looked at Situ Tsongyue and said. Situ Tsongyue nodded and suddenly asked, what did the Wang family of Beihai say? Li Honghe was the former god of war of Jianghu State. Although Li Guangtu's treason had dimmed the glory of the Li family, Li Honghe was still one of the veterans of Jianghu State and had a highly respected status. Situ Tsongyue should not have aimed the murderous weapon at Gu Xingyun. But Wang Tianzong should not have taken the initiative to attack the former god of war of Jianghu State. If Li Honghe died tonight, everything would be out of the question. But now Li Honghe was alive. It was believed that many people in Jianghu State had something to say. The Southeast group must also pay the price for what Wang Tianzong did tonight. The Li family was bound to get compensation. That was the rule. Everyone was abiding by the rule. I don't know. I'll listen to Tianlan. He can get whatever he wants. Qin Weibai smiled and said, now, our distinguished guest should be on their way. You did all this for him.
Situ Tsongyo looked at Qin Weibai with complicated eyes.
Is it worth it?
She paused and continued to ask, have you ever regretted it?
Qin Weibai's body stiffened for a moment. No, it's worth it,
she whispered, but her tone was full of firmness. After tonight, the plan that had been planned for many years would begin, and everything would be irreversible. Li Tianlan's East Emperor Palace would gradually be perfected and eventually form a real prototype after the maneuver. It was not until this moment that Qin Weibai was sure that she had really done everything she could do. All of it. She created a paradise for the man she loved most. At the same time, she created a hell for herself. Qin Weibai suddenly smiled and asked softly, have you ever regretted falling in love with Li Guangtu?
Situ Tsongyue froze for a moment and looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai's eyes were quiet and deep.
Situ Tsongyo shook her head and said,
no. This was respect for his feelings, and also respect for himself. Even if Li Guangtu really committed treason. Even if Li Guangtu was really heinous.
But for anyone, no matter what the nature of the person he fell in love with, no matter what happened later, as long as he loved, there was no need to regret.
Just because he loved.
When Qin Weibai went downstairs and returned to the living room, Li Honghe had already gone upstairs to rest.
Li Tianlan was still sitting in the hall.
Lin Fengting, who had left soon after arriving at the villa, reappeared in the hall. Beside him sat a handsome young man with almost the same temperament as him.
The three were chatting casually.
Qin Weibai went downstairs quietly and came to Li Tianlan's side. Lin Fengting glanced at her and said with a smile, Boss Qin, let me introduce you. This is my son, Lin Yuxian. You are all young people. You should support each other in the future. Yuxian, this is Qin Weibai, Boss Qin. Call her sister. Lin Yuxian came to Lin and with Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting arrived at Lonely Mountain first. Lin Yuxian did not catch up with the last earth-shattering sword, but was brought here by Lin Fengting. Lin Yuxian stood up with a smile and looked at Qin Weibai. He lost his composure for a moment and then calmed down again. However, he did not dare to take the initiative to reach out. He just scratched his head and said with a smile, Sister Qin, I am Lin Yuxian.
What Sister Qin? Call me sister. Lin Fengting frowned.
Lin Yuxian looked at his father strangely and then said with a wry smile, Sister.
Qin Weibai nodded with a smile. She took Li Tianlan's arm and sat beside him.
She chuckled and said, This is my husband.
You should all know him.
A playful smile flashed across Lin Fengting's mouth. Lin Yuxian immediately understood what Qin Weibai's unnecessary introduction meant. He looked at Li Tianlan and felt a little embarrassed.
He called Qin Weibai sister. What was his sister's husband? This boy.
When they met for the first time, he called him Brother Lin. Li Tianlan was also a little embarrassed. He quietly glared at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai smiled and was as beautiful as a flower. Li Tianlan just wanted to speak, but Lin Yuxian had already taken the initiative to speak. He reached out his hand as formally as they had just met for the first time.
Brother-in-law, hello. Brother Lin, you are too polite.
Li Tianlan held Lin Yuxian's hand and said with a wry smile, We'd better call each other separately. You are older than me. Brother-in-law is brother-in-law, not according to your age.
Lin Fengting interrupted Li Tianlan's words. Don't take advantage of me. That's it.
Qin Weibai looked at Lin Fengting meaningfully and said with a chuckle, I didn't prepare a greeting gift in advance. Yuxian's call of sister and brother-in-law is a little unfair.
We are family. Don't care about this. Lin Fengting said softly.
Qin Weibai took a deep look at him. She seemed to think of something and nodded. Little Bai, why don't you let Tianlan go to Wuxia to develop? Lin Fengting casually changed the way he addressed Qin Weibai and asked naturally. Li Tianlan turned his head subconsciously and glanced at Qin Weibai. Wuxia. Qin Weibai's expression was calm. She whispered, The water is too deep. As far as I know, Wuxia is more suitable for Tianlan's development now. Although it is the territory of the Wang family of Beihai, the Wang family of Beihai is now very complicated. If he is careful, Tianlan may be able to create his own foundation in Wuxia. Lin Fengting said quietly. The current leader of Wuxia is Wang Qinglei. He is a character.
Even if there is a foundation, it is fake, at least not stable. Qin Weibai shook her head and looked at Li Tianlan. The foundation of East Emperor Palace should be in the south. She said softly. The south? Li Tianlan repeated the words. Qin Weibai nodded. The southernmost. She held Li Tianlan's hand and said softly, there will be a chance soon. It is the most suitable for you to go to the south. In the southernmost south, she had prepared everything for Li Tianlan. As long as there was a chance, it would become Li Tianlan's path to heaven. Qin Weibai was even ready for the opportunity. The southernmost part of Jianghu state. It was not Nanyun province. It was Tiannan in the south of Nanyun. It was nearly 40,000 square kilometers, nominally belonging to Annan state, but now actually under the control of Jianghu state. For Li Tianlan. Chapter 330. Tiannan was heaven. Heaven was now spread on the tea table made of white marble. Lin Fengting and his son had gone upstairs to rest. Qin Weibai accompanied Li Tianlan to study the map of Tiannan. This was an extremely detailed and exquisite map. The topographical features of the 35,000 square kilometers of Tiannan were clearly displayed on it. Li Tianlan looked at the map. Qin Weibai's delicate fragrance drifted over. Smelling this fragrance, Li Tianlan's heart was more focused and calm. Why here? Li Tianlan asked. This is the most suitable place. Qin Weibai made a cup of tea for Li Tianlan and said softly. Li Tianlan took the teacup and said nothing, just quietly looking at the map of Tiannan in front of him. Tiannan was just a name for Jianghu state. And it was a private name for a few people standing in the upper class of Jianghu state. In fact, Annan state had never given up the fight for ownership of this territory. On the map, Tiannan was an irregular rectangle. This area, which was equivalent to 1/10 of the territory of Annan state, was extremely rich in terrain, including mountains, jungles, plains, and wetlands. There were 3 cities and more than 30 towns in Tiannan province, as well as some natural resources, which were not many but could not be ignored. For Jianghu state, since it had occupied this place, it could not give it up. Tiannan had now become a must-fight place for Jianghu state. And the must-fight place for Jianghu state. In Annan state, it must be protected. If it were not for the inexplicable war between the superpowers in the Dark World, today's Tiannan should have been the focus of all kinds of contradictions in the Dark World. Now there were 2 representative forces stationed in Tiannan. One was the Annan rebel army played by the Wang family of Beihai. In the border war 3 years ago, Annan state cooperated with the 5 superpowers to invade the border of Jianghu state in the name of the rebel army. Now this name had been used by Jianghu state for a long time. The elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion were traded to the Wang family of Beihai by the Dongqing clan. Wang Tianzong handed the Thunderbolt Battalion to Jianghu and asked him to be stationed in Tiannan. The reason that Jianghu state gave Annan state was also very fair. Annan state said that there was an uncontrolled rebel army in the country. Based on the principle that the 2 sides were friendly neighbors, Jianghu state directly sent troops to help Annan state suppress the rebellion. After entering Tiannan, Jianghu plundered all the resources here as fast as he could and sent them to the Wang family of Beihai. Then, under the constant protests of Annan state and the pressure exerted by the United Nations, the army of Jianghu state withdrew from Annan state under the leadership of Jianghu. But the so-called retreat was just a name. The Thunderbolt Battalion led by Jianghu retreated. The rebel army of Annan state led by Jianghu began to rise again. When they were in uniform they were the army, and they might be pressured by the military. But after burning the military uniforms, they were the rebels of Annan state, and they had no scruples at all. Now the Tiannan Freedom Corps established by Jianghu, with the secret support of the Wang family of Beihai, had a scale of 50,000 people, and they were all armed and elite. With the support of the Border Control Corps, this was already the greatest force in Tiannan. The other force belonged to the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital took the initiative to find Annan state. Knowing that it might not be able to recapture its territory, Annan state had no choice. Even if it knew that the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was also up to no good, Annan state could only pin its hopes on them for the time being. Therefore, with the support of Annan state, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital quickly gained a foothold in Tiannan, and its current strength was only slightly weaker than that of the Wang family of Beihai. In addition, The major forces of the Dark World had established secret strongholds in Tiannan. But with the war in the Dark World, the major forces had no energy to invest in Tiannan for the time being, so their strength was not to be feared. This was the current situation of Tiannan. Jianghu State, the Wang family of Beihai. Annan State, the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Plus the major forces of the Dark World that might participate in the future.
The land of more than 30,000 square kilometers was not big, and it was the area of a small province.
But the geographical location here was really too important. As long as it was occupied, it was possible to go north to Jianghu State and south to Annan State.
Even if the force that occupied here did not have this strength, it could get the expected huge benefits if it swayed a little between Jianghu State and Annan State in the future.
Now the Dark World was in chaos, and the war was endless. But any chaos would dissipate. At that time, the land of Tiannan would definitely become the focus of the Dark World's attention. Li Tianlan looked at the map in front of him, thinking about what the East Emperor Palace would get if it developed in Tiannan. "It's too messy," he said softly. Not to mention the confrontation between the major dark forces in Tiannan in the future. Even now the situation was not clear. It was definitely not easy for the East Emperor Palace to go to Tiannan and be sandwiched between the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Wang family of Beihai. But compared to Jianghu State, Tiannan is the most suitable place for you to rise. Qin Weibai leaned against Li Tianlan and said softly, "After the maneuver, the cooperation between the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City in Jianghu State may be further strengthened." Governor Situ seriously injured Gu Xingyun with the setting sun tonight, and the murderous weapon of Sai City will definitely change hands. Not only that, the special warfare system of the three provinces in the northeast, except for Guangdong, may also fall into the hands of Kunlun City. But with this result, the Northeast Special Warfare Headquarters of Jianghu State should be established. Now that you have grown to a certain extent, both the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City will try their best to limit your growth. The Special Warfare Headquarters of various regions will definitely be implemented in the shortest time. Although Jianghu State is large, under the pressure of the Special Warfare Headquarters, there are really not many regions that are suitable for your development. Li Tianlan nodded. "Only Tiannan." "Only Tiannan," Qin Weibai said with certainty. "Tiannan is currently outside Jianghu State, but it is regarded as a possession by Jianghu State. But on the surface, everything in Tiannan has nothing to do with Jianghu State. Even the Tiannan Freedom Corps led by Di Jiang now looks like a rebel army inside Annan State." Qin Weibai turned Li Tianlan's body around, looked into his eyes, and said, "For the time being, Tiannan is still a place where the special warfare system of Jianghu State can't influence, but it is regarded as its own territory by Jianghu State. So if you go to Tiannan, no one in Jianghu State will object. Not only the East Emperor Palace, but maybe soon, all the forces in Jianghu State will go to Tiannan. It may be regarded as the last pure land of the free forces." "The last pure land?" Li Tianlan took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep breath. No matter how chaotic Tiannan was at present, it was still the land of Annan State in name. However, that land had now been completely out of control and became the battlefield of the Wang family of Beihai and the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Wherever the rebel army passed, there was naturally no effective regime left. Tiannan now belonged to the rebel area of Annan State. There was no order and no strong regime rule there. Annan State was helpless about the rebel area. Naturally, the special warfare system of Jianghu State could not intervene and build a new order there. So the rules of Jianghu State were basically useless there. In that case, it was indeed a pure land with its own forces. Whoever could rule Tiannan could create a new order in Tiannan. But the Wang family of Beihai and the Purgatory of Heaven capital are there. The free forces in the country don't have such courage, do they? Li Tianlan shook his head. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was easy to deal with. But the Wang family of Beihai was a real behemoth in Jianghu State. Tiannan was regarded as a thing in the pocket by Jianghu State, and also by the Wang family of Beihai. The free forces of Jianghu State went to Tiannan province without the permission of the Wang family of Beihai, which was tantamount to snatching meat from the Wang family of Beihai. Who had the guts to do that? Now they don't have such courage, but soon they will. Qin Weibai smiled. If there are major problems inside the Wang family of Beihai and they can't take care of themselves, can they still take care of the interests of Tiannan? Li Tianlan was shocked and looked at Qin Weibai carefully. The Wang family of Beihai would have problems. As early as a few years ago, he heard from military counselor. But Qin Weibai's tone. Did she want to take the initiative to cause internal problems in the Wang family of Beihai? Now this time. Seemed a little earlier than what she said at the beginning. What do you want to do? Li Tianlan asked in a cautious tone.
He frowned and said in a very firm tone, "You can't do anything."
For the Wang family of Beihai, he always had an instinctive vigilance and fear. Li Tianlan didn't know how powerful the Wang family of Beihai was, but it was definitely not something that the Samsara Palace could shake.
"I won't do anything stupid."
Qin Weibai reached out and stroked Li Tianlan's face. Her hands were slightly cold, and her eyes were as gentle as water. "I just want you to relax. Tell me about your plan," Li Tianlan said. This was the first time he asked about the Samsara Palace's plan. "My plan is very simple." Qin Weibai smiled sweetly. "After you go to Tiannan, use the funds in your hands to set up a trading company first. I will arrange for people to support the trading company. This is the fastest industry for you to establish a foothold in Tiannan, and also your core foundation. With your strength, it is not difficult for you to establish a foothold in Tiannan. After that, the East Emperor Palace will slowly expand." Tianlan, have you ever thought about what kind of position Jianghu State will give you when you return to Jianghu State with more than 30,000 square kilometers of land in the future? There was a very shining light in Qin Weibai's eyes. It was a kind of persistence with strong expectation and longing. But Li Tianlan's heart slowly sank. What he wanted to hear was Qin Weibai's plan, not the future of the East Emperor Palace. The future of the East Emperor Palace was too simple in Qin Weibai's narration. It was so simple that Li Tianlan couldn't detect what Qin Weibai had arranged behind his back. Qin Weibai took off the green hairpin on her head and put it in Li Tianlan's hand. She whispered, "This is for you. Trade is your foundation in Tiannan, and this is your trump card in Tiannan." Li Tianlan was suddenly shocked. He didn't have to think to know what this hairpin was. He had a falling stars on his wrist. When the brave soldiers were close to each other, they would completely sense each other. In short, the murderous soldier's energy storage time would be accelerated. The hairpin in Qin Weibai's hand was undoubtedly blue sky underworld of the Samsara Palace. Giving away the murderous weapon, Qin Weibai was not only generous, but most importantly, where did she get the power? "My sister asked me to bring out blue sky underworld for you to use." Qin Weibai whispered, "It will take at least 3 years for blue sky underworld to store energy. You also have a murderous weapon here. If you put them together, the storage time will be slightly faster. Anyway, blue sky underworld can't be used now, so it's better to leave it with you. If it can help you gain a foothold in Tiannan, my sister will be very happy." Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai silently. His hand trembled slightly, but his tone was still calm. "Answer my question." He looked at Qin Weibai and said, "What question?" Qin Weibai blinked and began to play dumb. What does the Samsara Palace want to do? Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai, and the uneasiness in his heart gradually became stronger. It was an indescribable intuition. Perhaps there was a basis, but Li Tianlan couldn't tell. He just instinctively felt that something was wrong. Qin Weibai didn't speak, just turned her head to look at the map of Tiannan in front of her. Li Tianlan turned to look at the map. The atmosphere seemed to become silent and awkward for a moment. "I don't deserve to know?" After a long time, Li Tianlan suddenly asked. "It's not that you don't deserve it." Qin Weibai shook her head without hesitation. "Then tell me what I want to know." Li Tianlan said blandly, "I don't like the feeling of being controlled. Even if the person who controls me is you, even if you do it for my sake, I don't like it." He wasn't sure what he wanted to know, but he suddenly felt a little uneasy in his heart. This kind of uneasiness had existed since Qin Weibai first appeared, but it was very faint. After 3 years, Qin Weibai appeared so abruptly that Li Tianlan couldn't tell what kind of feeling it was. But when Qin Weibai handed Blue Sky Underworld to him, the bad intuition in his heart suddenly became extremely strong. Qin Weibai handed Blue Sky Underworld to him. What would happen to the Samsara Palace? What would she do? Even if Blue Sky Underworld couldn't be used for the time being, it was a murderous weapon. Would she give it to someone else if she couldn't use it? Li Tianlan had never heard of this. We are going to do something in snow country. Qin Weibai hesitated and finally said, What is it? Li Tianlan asked. Don't ask, okay? Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan with a pleading look in her eyes. Li Tianlan's heart softened, but he forced himself to harden his heart and said calmly, I will know. You will know soon. Qin Weibai said softly, Tianlan, give me a little more time. 1 month, 2 months at most, and I will tell you everything, okay? She hugged Li Tianlan and leaned her head against his chest. She whispered, 2 months at most. Everything will be over. At that time, I'll come back to you and tell you all my secrets. We'll always be together. I won't do anything. I'll be raised by you at home peacefully. Is that okay? Her eyes were hazy and full of longing. Why 2 months later? Li Tianlan asked, touching her long hair. Qin Weibai didn't speak. She couldn't tell him that her longing would always be a longing. And she couldn't tell him that everything she said now was a lie. In the north. In snow country. In that world of ice and snow, she would try her best to drag the Wang family of Beihai into hell forever. Hell was in the north. Only when she fell into hell could Li Tianlan get the most free heaven. Tianlan, trust me one more time. I don't want to control your life. This is the last time. Believe me, it's really the last time. Qin Weibai said quietly. Her heart seemed to twitch into a ball. She used deception to get Li Tianlan's trust. She didn't know if Li Tianlan would forgive her when he knew the truth. She didn't dare to think about it. Okay. Li Tianlan held her body and nodded gently. Qin Weibai smiled brightly, like a flower blooming in the morning in early summer. She kissed Li Tianlan's face and said in a sweet voice, Good boy, this is my good husband. Call me again. Li Tianlan suppressed all the thoughts in his heart and ordered with a smile. Good husband. Qin Weibai called again obediently, her voice sweet and gentle. Call me again. Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai's cheeks gradually becoming rosy and smiled playfully. Qin Weibai shook her head. She leaned close to Li Tianlan, bit his ear and whispered, Carry me to the room, and I'll call you on the bed, okay? Li Tianlan's breathing suddenly quickened. Okay. He really didn't think there was anything wrong with it. Li Tianlan suddenly bent down, picked up Qin Weibai's delicate body, and strode upstairs. The light was on in the master bedroom of the villa. Li Tianlan pushed open the door almost violently, and subconsciously wanted to turn off the light. No. Qin Weibai's charming eyes were like silk. I don't want to turn off the light. I want to look at you. Li Tianlan growled and threw Qin Weibai on the bed. Qin Weibai's black hair spread on the bed wantonly, and the goddess under the light looked more charming and languid. Li Tianlan rushed over. Qin Weibai smiled and put her hands around Li Tianlan's neck. Her eyes were bright and sparkling, looking deeply at Li Tianlan's face. The man who made her willing to give up everything. The man she owed too much to. Qin Weibai looked at him quietly, as if she wanted to imprint his face in her soul. She never regretted what she had done. She just felt a little reluctant. Chapter 331. The night in Beihai was long. When the long night was about to pass, Wang Tianzong had returned to Mount Dibing from Lin En. The lights on Mount Dibing were shining. The bright and dazzling light completely dispelled the darkest night before dawn. The light was like a curtain, shining on every corner of the mountain. There were figures everywhere from the foot of the mountain to the top of the mountain. The internal security forces of the Wang family of Beihai were all in action. The strong light lit up everywhere. In the dark night, there were no shadows on the mountain or at the foot of the mountain. There was silence in front of Emperor Hall. This was the place where the light was focused, but everyone nearby intentionally or unintentionally avoided it. The rockery and garden in front of the hall had completely disappeared. After the mess after the war was cleaned up, it looked extremely empty. 3 middle-aged men in the standard military uniforms of Beihai province knelt in front of the silent hall with pale faces, sweating all over their faces. Wang Tianzong, who just came back and saw this scene, suddenly felt his heart sink. The sword energy on the top of the mountain had dissipated, but the fierce sword intent still remained. Wang Tianzong felt all this, and his strength seemed to be gradually disappearing.
He stood there silently and did not move for a long time. The elites of the internal security forces came and went. Finally, someone saw Wang Tianzong, so they instinctively saluted and called him Your Majesty. There were more and more people. The solemn atmosphere continued to spread on Mount Dibing. Wang Tianzong's brain was buzzing. He only felt that countless figures were shaking in front of him. The perfect state of mind that had been maintained for many years was in chaos. The light seemed so dazzling that he could not see everything clearly. Your Majesty! Your Majesty! Countless people were shouting in his ears.
It was a mess. Wang Tianzong finally came to his senses. In front of him, the elites of the internal security forces had knelt on the ground. Everyone had a complicated expression, mixed with inexplicable fear and shame. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath. His expression was calm, and the light deep in his eyes returned to indifference. He was the sword emperor of the Wang family of Beihai. The emperor could have fear and timidity. But under the light, the emperor could only have majesty.
Do what you should do, Wang Tianzong said and slowly walked to his palace. The three middle-aged men kneeling in front of the palace grew increasingly nervous, and a large amount of sweat even seeped out of their foreheads. The military uniforms the three of them wore were modified by the Wang family of Beihai, but the military ranks on their shoulders were no different from those of Jianghu state. 1 lieutenant general and 2 major generals were the 3 main leaders of the internal defense force of the Wang family of Beihai. Although they were retainers of the Wang family of Beihai, they were still generals of Jianghu state even if they were out of Beihai province. In theory, they could have a position that matched their military ranks in any place in Jianghu state. But now, these 3 generals with real power were kneeling silently, and there was even some fear on their faces. Wang Tianzong walked up to them. The 3 generals lowered their heads, the sweat on their foreheads already dripping to the ground.
Get up, Wang Tianzong said. The 3 of them did not get up.
The corner of the lieutenant general's mouth twitched as he said hoarsely, Your Majesty! What's going on? Wang Tianzong looked at the lieutenant general in front of him and said calmly, Wuxia, you are my brother.
Stand up and talk.
Wuxia, the commander of the internal defense force, was a lieutenant general of Beihai, the most senior expert of the half-step invincible realm in the Wang family of Beihai, and the patriarch of the wealthy Wu family. He was one of Wang Tianzong's most trusted confidants. No matter what happened tonight, Wuxia could not participate in it. This was the most basic trust.
Wuxia's face turned red. He seemed to be a little excited, but more ashamed.
He gritted his teeth but did not get up. He just said in a hoarse voice, Your Majesty, I'm incompetent. A group of thunder-shocking realm experts of unknown origin sneaked into the top of the mountain. They wore some special equipment and attacked Madam.
This is my negligence.
Wang Tianzong's eyes suddenly condensed. A group of thunder-shocking realm experts sneaked into the top of the mountain?
He asked softly after a moment of silence.
Yes. Wuxia's voice was full of embarrassment and embarrassment. The internal defense force was stationed at the foot of the mountain and halfway up the mountain. Only a small number of elites were stationed at the top of the mountain. The enemy suddenly launched an attack at the top of the mountain. The internal defense force had no time to support them no matter how fast they reacted. It seemed that the responsibility of the internal defense force was not great. But it was the negligence of the internal defense force to let the enemy sneak into the top of the mountain. Not to mention that the monitoring eyes of the internal defense force could monitor every corner outside the top of the mountain. Even the guests who came and went to Mount Dibing were strictly examined by the internal defense force. They attacked the hostess of the Wang family of Beihai at the top of the mountain. This was completely inconceivable before. Wuxia, you have been really careless these years. Wang Tianzong said in a low voice after a long silence. Wuxia, who kept sweating, calmed down and said in a deep voice, It's my negligence.
Get up.
Wang Tianzong shook his head. The internal defense force comes up with a new plan that can ensure the safety of Mount Dibing in the future.
I want to see this report in 3 days.
Yes.
Wuxia stood up and bowed deeply.
The other 2 major generals still knelt where they were and did not dare to move.
Wang Tianzong's eyes fell on the 2 of them.
He was silent for a moment and then whispered, I can trust Wuxia.
But can I trust you?
Your Majesty. The 2 major generals raised their heads at the same time and looked terrified. Without the secret cover of the internal defense force,
The enemy can't sneak into Mount Dibbing, let alone bring equipment. Wuxia has not been in Mount Dibbing recently. This is his dereliction of duty, but the dereliction of duty can be investigated in the future. But the betrayal must be solved now.
Wang Tianzong's voice became softer and softer, and a thick and cold killing intent slowly diffused from him.
I don't know who is the traitor. If you are willing to stand out, I can let your family go.
The treatment of the internal defense force was excellent, but at the same time, the discipline was extremely strict. Ordinary officers with the rank below colonel, except for the elite stationed at the top of the mountain, were forbidden to go up the mountain without the transfer order. As for taking some special equipment up the mountain, it needed the signature of a commander and 2 deputy commanders of the internal defense force.
This was a loophole that could not be covered up. It seemed that the other party did not intend to cover it up.
From the moment of attacking summer solstice, the other party had already regarded the hidden pawn buried in the internal defense force as a chess piece. At present, it seemed that the 2 major generals in front of him were suspects, at least the biggest suspects.
Wang Tianzong did not say what would happen if they were unwilling to stand out. Summer solstice was definitely his reverse scale. If no one was willing to stand out, Wang Tianzong did not even bother to investigate. The 2 major generals and their families might not be spared tonight. It was okay to kill the wrong person. Silence.
In the dead silence, a major general suddenly moved. He reached out, took off the epaulet on his shoulder, and respectfully placed it in front of Wang Tianzong.
Your Majesty, please keep your promise and let my family go.
The major general wiped the sweat on his forehead, and his face had become completely calm.
Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. Wu Qiu's face suddenly twisted.
His eyes were filled with anger and a trace of disbelief.
Wang Xian? How dare you betray the Wang family of Beihai? Wang Xian's face was slightly pale.
He sighed and was about to speak.
He didn't betray the Wang family of Beihai, but me. Wang Tianzong said lightly.
Wang Xian was taken aback and kept silent.
Who is it? Wang Tianzong asked.
Wang Xian smiled bitterly and shook his head.
Your Majesty, I don't know who they are. I'm just following orders. Whose orders are you following? Wu Qiu grinned grimly and took a step forward subconsciously. Wang Tianzong calmly stopped him. Wang Xian's expression became calmer.
He looked at Wu Qiu with a trace of complexity in his eyes and then smiled.
Commander, I'm following orders.
As for whose orders, I don't mind saying it, but do you and your Majesty really want to hear it? It's Wang. Wang Xian opened his mouth, but just spat out 2 words. The space in front of Emperor Hall suddenly fell into absolute silence.
Wang Xian's mouth was still moving. He seemed to want to say that name. But the space around him had been completely distorted, and even his mouth shape had become completely out of shape. He tried to say something, but he couldn't make a sound, and his mouth shape couldn't be recognized. Streaks of blood shot out from his body one after another. Wang Xian seemed to suffer great pain, and his eyes became crazy for a moment. I can understand your thoughts, but there must be a bottom line for everything. Whoever dares to cross this line must die. Wang Tianzong calmly said, You're right. I really don't want to hear it, and I don't need to. The vague sword intent filled every corner of Wang Xian's surroundings. Blood sprayed all over the sky.
In the cold and sharp sword intent, Wang Xian's whole body gradually turned into a pile of minced meat, and finally turned into nothingness in the sword energy.
Wu Qiu stood beside Wang Tianzong, and his eyes were calm and cold.
Your Majesty, just let it go?
Until Wang Xian's body disappeared, Wu Qiu gritted his teeth and asked.
It's not the time.
Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and shook his head.
He reached out his hand, and the Major General epaulet on the ground fell into his hand.
He handed the epaulet to Wu Qiu casually. He said flatly, Find a suitable person, let him take it, and then report it to the political department of Jianghu State. Remember your plan. I want to see it as soon as possible. Wu Qiu took the epaulet respectfully and answered. Wang Tianzong turned around and walked to the main hall.
Let Xian Ming come to see me. As he said this, he put his hand in front of the door of Emperor Hall.
His movements were a little hesitant. From an angle that Wu Qiu couldn't see, his eyes were scared and worried.
The door of Emperor Hall was pushed open little by little.
Wang Tianzong walked in.
The desk lamp was on in the bedroom in the hall. The orange light illuminated a corner of the bedroom, which looked very warm. Summer Solstice's exquisite body was curled up on the bed at this time, and her whole body was shaking uncontrollably, as if she was suffering great pain. Wang Tianzong walked into the bedroom silently, got on the bed, lifted the heavy quilt that was out of season, and held Summer Solstice tightly in his arms. Summer Solstice's body was extremely cold, as if there was no temperature at all.
Wang Tianzong held her. There was silence. "It's okay." Summer Solstice took the initiative to speak.
Her voice was a little trembling, but it was extremely gentle. She smiled reluctantly, but it was very beautiful.
"It's not very painful. It's just that I haven't done it for so many years, and I'm not used to this feeling." "Do you know who did it?"
Wang Tianzong asked in a low voice, holding Summer Solstice's hand tighter and tighter, as if he wanted to give all his warmth to her.
Summer Solstice lay in Wang Tianzong's arms and shook her head. Wang Tianzong stopped talking. In fact, there was no need to ask.
He remembered the woman who had said in the World Palace last night that she would let the Wang family of Beihai fall into hell forever. His eyes became cold and piercingly cold.
"I'm cold," Summer Solstice said softly.
Wang Tianzong restrained his killing intent, hugged her as much as he could, and covered her with the quilt.
"It's okay,"
Summer Solstice said. "It'll be fine at dawn. I haven't used the sword for many years, and my body can't bear the sword intent.
In fact, it's not a big deal. It'll be okay if there are several more attacks like this. In the past, you spoiled me too much. If I could do it from time to time, maybe I would have adapted to it." "There won't be a second time," Wang Tianzong said in a deep voice. "Let Summer Solstice do it from time to time? How could he bear to do it?" Summer Solstice.
This name had gradually been forgotten by the dark world over the years. After the battle against Li Kuang-tu, there was no more legend about her in the dark world.
No one knew her current state, except for Wang Tianzong.
In the decades of the Wang family of Beihai, Summer Solstice was the only person who had taken the whole set of immortality potion.
The purpose of doing so was not to recover her injury. It was to let her live. This was Wang Tianzong's decision that year.
He just wanted Summer Solstice to stay with him and grow old with him.
He didn't care about combat capability.
In his eyes, Summer Solstice, who was quietly playing with flowers and plants, was the most beautiful Summer Solstice.
"Use another set of immortality potion," Wang Tianzong said softly.
His tone was calm and ordinary, as simple as letting Summer Solstice eat a piece of candy.
"Fool, it doesn't work."
Summer Solstice chuckled and said, "And it's not necessary. It's impossible for my injury to recover.
When dawn comes, I guess I'll be fine." Wang Tianzong was silent. He was very clear about Summer Solstice's current state.
In terms of sword intent, Summer Solstice was still at the peak of the invincible realm, even not much inferior to him. In terms of foundation, she was now only equivalent to an ordinary woman. The battle that year was too fierce, and her foundation was destroyed in that battle. If it weren't for the immortality potion, Summer Solstice wouldn't even have lived for a year after that battle. Although she survived successfully now, the result of her martial arts foundation being completely loose was that her sword intent was still there, but her body was getting worse and worse. In short, Summer Solstice could still exert the combat capability of the invincible realm, but her combat capability was extremely limited, and it couldn't be recovered. If Summer Solstice at her peak pulled out her sword, she could even fight against Wang Tianzong head-on. But her foundation was loose, so her sword intent became limited. She only had so much sword intent. Once it was used up, she would have no foundation and could never recover. To some extent, a peak of the invincible realm like Summer Solstice was a consumable. The cruelest consumable. Her combat capability would gradually decrease with the increase of the number of fights, and her foundation was not there. Every time she pulled out her sword, it would bring her extreme pain. Summer Solstice said that she would be fine at dawn. At that time, it might just be that her body would no longer hurt. In the next few years, Summer Solstice's body could not fully recover. Wang Tianzong knew very well what those who attacked Summer Solstice were thinking. He was reluctant to let Summer Solstice fight. But those people obviously didn't think so. For them, the existence of Summer Solstice, in any general trend,
would become a force that could change the battle situation. That was why there was the attack tonight. After this attack, for at least a few years, summer solstice would be pressed on Mount Dibing and could no longer fight. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and spat it out heavily. For many years, he didn't seem to be as aggrieved as he was now.
I can actually understand what she did,
Wang Tianzong whispered, but I can't accept it.
Who?
Summer solstice raised her head, looking confused. A woman as stupid as you. Wang Tianzong tidied the hair in front of summer solstice's forehead and said softly. To some extent, Qin Weibai and summer solstice were actually the same kind of people.
There were always some women who could burn themselves unreservedly for their men and were willing to give everything of themselves, even their souls.
In fact, there was one thing that Wang Tianzong didn't tell Li Honghe. Before he entered the invincible realm, the Wang family of Beihai was in the most dangerous period. When he was still tentatively contacting Kunlun City for cooperation. It was summer solstice who found the Gu family alone. She directly promoted the treason case of Jianghu state that shocked the dark world. At that time, Wang Tianzong was as ignorant as Li Tianlan was now. When everything happened, he understood what was going on. I'm not stupid. Summer solstice wrinkled her nose and was a little dissatisfied. You're the stupidest. Wang Tianzong looked at summer solstice. The light in the bedroom was too dim, and summer solstice was too beautiful. So his eyes were a little blurred.
Your Majesty. A voice sounded outside Emperor Hall, calm and cold.
I'm Xian Ming. Xian Ming. The person in charge of all intelligence agencies of the Wang family of Beihai. The person in charge. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and said calmly, What did you find? Who went to Mount Dibing tonight? I can't be sure at the moment. Xian Ming paused for a while and said, It's very likely to be Samsara Palace. There are 2 people, suspected to be saint and military counselor. I'll continue to investigate. There's no need to investigate. Wang Tianzong sneered and said calmly, Find another direction. 10 days. I'll give you 10 days. No matter what method you use, no matter how much you pay, I want the address of the headquarters of Samsara Palace. At all costs. Remember, you only have 10 days. The voice of Xian Ming outside the hall fell silent. Wang Tianzong lowered his head and looked at summer solstice in his arms.
He whispered, 10 days later I'll avenge you.
You have to be careful. Summer solstice blinked her eyes and looked tired. Her eyelids gradually closed. Don't be impulsive.
Well, go to sleep.
Wang Tianzong stroked her head. The bedroom gradually fell silent. Tianzong. In the silence, summer solstice's voice sounded like a whisper. Do you think there will be a place for me on the stone of formidable person in the future? Of course there will be.
Wang Tianzong whispered. There must be.
Where will it be? Summer solstice's voice became softer. No matter where you are, I'll be by your side. Wang Tianzong whispered. I'll always be by your side. Very good. Summer solstice smiled softly. Very good, and it was the best. She never regretted becoming Wang Tianzong's wife, nor did she regret her contribution to the Wang family of Beihai. They would stay together until their hair turned white. As long as she could be with him, even if it was a mountain of knives, a sea of fire, or a cliff, as long as he was still by her side. His temperature was the most desirable tenderness. The light gradually bloomed in the sky. The coldness and pain like night began to fade. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.